Chapter 795. After hesitating for a while, I didn't hug Yi Piampian, nor did I say anything to comfort her. I just let her hug me, sobbing in my chest. Han Wen'an heard the commotion and came over. When he saw Yi Piampian hugging me tightly, he nodded at me expressionlessly. Then, he stood next to me, waiting for Yi Piampian to vent her emotions. After a long while, Yi Piampian finally calmed down and slowly let go of me. She seemed to have realized that she had lost her composure. She retreated to the side and silently wiped the tears off her face. However, she didn't apologize. Her behavior reminded me of the cold Yi Piampian we had met for the first time. After she calmed down, she invited us into the room to talk. The decorations in the room weren't much different from the ones we had seen before, but it had a little more fragrance. After we sat down, she asked us how we had found this place. I didn't hurry to answer and looked at Han Wen'an next to me. Yi Piampian seemed to have sensed something from my gaze, as she also looked at Han Wen'an. Han Wen'an and Yi Piampian looked at each other for a few seconds. He immediately retracted his gaze and looked elsewhere, his face blushing. His reaction made me feel helpless. It seemed that it would be difficult to make Han Wen'an tell me the truth. Then, I told Yi Piampian the whole story. She didn't change her expression and looked at Han Wen'an. Then, she cupped her fists and said, "I'm sorry to have caused you trouble." Han Wen'an was delighted and waved his hand to indicate that it was all right. He didn't look like he would be able to recover in a short time. I asked Yi Piampian what had happened in the past year and emphasized on why she and Yi Maolan had behaved that way when I was in the glorious state of consciousness. Yi Piampian was straightforward and told me the whole story. I learned from her that when she had met Yi Maolan at Mount Huangguanshan, she had learned of Nangong's plan. Nangong had predicted that I would advance to the glorious state of consciousness after the strange phenomenon in the sky. It was also at that time that the people from the Metaphysics Association would attack me to eliminate me, the so-called remnant of the witch race. After learning of this, Nangong made a plan to have Yi Piampian and Yi Maolan put aside their differences and work together to save my life. As I listened to her narration, I couldn't help but recall what had happened that day. Yi Piampian and Yi Maolan had clasped their hands in front of me. Then, they had transformed into a half-red, half-white bird. Then, the life, bright stone that the old president had given me had suddenly transformed and sucked me in. Thinking about this, I couldn't help but ask her about the flying bird and the shining stone. Yi Piampian shook her head and said that she didn't know about the flying bird. As for the bright stone, old President Li had never mentioned it to her. Her words made me think. Back then, the bright stone that the old president had given me with the word life engraved on it suddenly changed at such a crucial moment. It was obvious that the old president had predicted this. However, I didn't understand why he would save me time and time again when he clearly knew that I had shaman qi in my body. What exactly was his objective? Yi Piampian saw that I didn't react, so she continued. She and Yi Maolan had lost consciousness after transforming into bird. When she woke up, I was nowhere to be seen. Even Nangong and Yi Maolan were gone. Only the people from the Metaphysics Association were left to search for me. After Yi Piampian woke up, she didn't hurry to find me. She knew that Nangong must have saved me, so she returned home alone. After returning home, the old president brought her to the Peng Lai immortal region. At that time, the old president didn't say anything and only sealed her veins of the heavens. Yi Piampian vaguely knew what had happened, so she didn't ask about it. After listening to her, I didn't understand. The old president had given me the bright stone and didn't stop Yi Piampian's actions. This showed his stance. Perhaps he didn't show up because of his status in the metaphysics world. I could understand that. However, why did he bring Yi Piampian to the Peng Lai immortal region? I pondered over this for a long time. Suddenly, a thought flashed through my mind. I understood the old president's intentions. Back then, Yi Pianpian had ignored the Metaphysics Association's opposition and insisted on saving me. She was already standing on the opposite side of the Metaphysics Association. In the eyes of the Metaphysics Association, it was an unforgivable crime to save a survivor of the witch tribe. After this, the Metaphysics Association wouldn't let Yi Pianpian off. However, Yi Pianpian was President Li's disciple. If the Metaphysics Association wanted to punish her, they had to consider President Li. However, the old president was also a member of the Metaphysics Association. Although he supported Yi Pianpian's actions, he couldn't do it openly. However, Yi Pianpian couldn't be handed over to the Metaphysics Association. Left with no choice, the old president brought Yi Pianpian to the Peng Lai Immortal Region. The Peng Lai Immortal Region was hard to find. Moreover, the barrier outside couldn't be broken by external forces. Yi Pianpian was indeed very safe here. Thinking about this, I suddenly understood. I originally thought that the old president locked Yi Pianpian here to punish her. I didn't expect there to be such a deeper meaning. Now that I knew the old president's intentions, if I brought Yi Pianpian out, not only would I waste the old man's efforts, but the Metaphysics Association would also notice. Fortunately, I had an expert like the sacrificial evil spirit with me. In the Metaphysics Association, President Li was probably the only one who could fight against him. I didn't have to worry about other small fries. Thinking about this, I told Yi Pianpian to pack up and leave the Peng Lai Immortal Region with us before the white-haired old man noticed. After hearing my words, Han Wennan immediately stood up and was about to urge Yi Pianpian to leave. However, to my surprise, Yi Pianpian shook her head and refused us. Han Wennan and I were shocked to see her like that. I didn't expect her to make such a decision. Could it be that there was some hidden reason? Thinking about this, I anxiously asked her if she had any difficulties. Yi Pianpian didn't respond immediately. After a long silence, she sighed and said, "I know my current situation. If I go out with you, I'll be a burden to you. Moreover, my master has already warned me that I can't leave the Peng Lai Immortal Region before he returns. Otherwise, the consequences will be unpredictable." Her words made me calm down instantly. It wasn't because I was afraid of being implicated by her. This matter started because of me, and it was my duty to protect Yi Pianpian. However, she mentioned that the consequences would be unpredictable. This reminded me of the woman who looked exactly like Yi Pianpian in the Inshu Royal Mausoleum. The old president wasn't someone who spoke without thinking. The consequences he mentioned were probably related to this matter. Understanding this, I gave up on the idea of taking Yi Pianpian with me. Since she didn't want to leave with us, it was useless to persuade her. At this time, I didn't need to worry about the old man anymore. It wouldn't hurt to stay here for a while longer. I didn't mention this matter again. Instead, I told Yi Pianpian about my experiences in the past year. However, I didn't tell her some key things. Yi Pianpian didn't interrupt me. She just sat there and listened quietly. Things would eventually come to an end, so I didn't want to stay any longer. I stood up to bid farewell to Yi Pianpian. Hearing that I was leaving, Yi Pianpian's throat moved as if she wanted to say something to persuade me to stay. However, she didn't say anything in the end. She probably knew that I still had a lot of things to do and couldn't stay in the Peng Lai Immortal Region forever. She walked toward me and moved her hands as if she wanted to hug me. However, she seemed to realize something and her hands stopped in midair. She paused and said, "Take care of yourself." I nodded and prepared to leave with Han Wennan. Unexpectedly, he shook his head, indicating that he wanted to stay here for a few more days. He told me that he had instructed the pilot to wait for us at the same place that night, and that he would take us back after we had gotten out of here. Looking at his appearance, he really didn't want to leave just like that. Since I couldn't take Yi Pianpian away, it wouldn't hurt to let him stay here for a few more days. Since he insisted, I didn't try to persuade him. After today's matter, Yi Pianpian's attitude toward Han Wennan had changed. She didn't want to drive him away. After thanking Han Wennan, I left the village with the evil sacrificial spirit. However, I didn't plan on leaving the Peng Lai immortal region. Firstly, I wanted to take this opportunity to thoroughly investigate the connection between the Peng Lai immortal region and Billowing Waves Mountain. Secondly, the Qilin's whereabouts were still unknown. If I didn't find it, I wouldn't be able to rest easy. Unexpectedly, we met the white-haired old man again when we left the village. He had his back to us and was standing not far away with his hands behind his back. It seemed that he was waiting for us. I was suspicious, but I didn't dare to be negligent. I hurriedly ran to his back and cupped my hands in greeting. "Senior, what can I do for you?" After hearing my words, the white-haired old man slowly turned around and asked softly, "Did you see your old friend?" I didn't know why he was doing this. Could it be that he was waiting for me here just to ask about this? I couldn't figure out the reason, so I told him the truth. The old man nodded, stroked his beard, and continued to ask, "Are you looking for that beast?" His words stunned me, but I immediately understood. The old man should be referring to the Qilin. From what he said, did he know where the Qilin was? Or did he capture the Qilin? I pondered. Since he didn't look angry, the Qilin probably didn't offend him. In that case, the old man probably wanted to tell me where the Qilin was. Thinking about this, I hurriedly nodded and asked about the Qilin's whereabouts. Unexpectedly, the old man's face lit up. He waved at me and told me not to look for the Qilin as it couldn't leave with me. After hearing this, I couldn't help but feel puzzled. I didn't know what the old man's intentions were. Why did he say that the Qilin couldn't leave with me? Could it be that he knew the Qilin's purpose and wanted to take it for himself? However, on second thought, the old man was the master of the Peng Lai immortal region. If he really wanted to keep the Qilin, he didn't have to tell me. He only needed to hide the Qilin. When I felt that there was no hope of finding it, I would leave. Chapter 796. When I heard this voice, I froze on the spot. There was no other reason than that I was too familiar with the words "you'll know in the future." From the very beginning when Bayan appeared by my side, to the Nangong Palace, to the sacrifice of the evil spirit, until now, I can't remember how many people have told me the words, "you'll know in the future." Although this white-haired old man is the master of Peng Lai, it's really not strange to hear him say these words. I didn't even bother to guess the reason. After thinking for a while, I concluded that the Qilin wouldn't be in any danger if he stayed here. Moreover, the white-haired old man was far more powerful than me, and I owed him a debt of gratitude for not obstructing my search for Yi Pianpian. So, I didn't hesitate and turned to leave. Han Wennan stayed here while the sacrificial evil spirit and I walked back to where we had come from. Soon, we arrived at the place where we had come from. But when we got here, I realized a problem. When we first came here, we relied on the Qilin to break the barrier. Now that the Qilin stayed here and didn't follow us, how could we get out? I was dumbfounded. When I was talking to the old man, I only cared about the Qilin and didn't think about our own safety. I wanted to find the old man again, but how could we find him in the vast Peng Lai immortal region? He was a person with great cultivation, and he didn't live in a village like Yi Pianpian. While I was thinking, the sacrificial evil spirit suddenly walked to the barrier in front of us. He stared at the seemingly empty barrier for a while, then suddenly reached out and pressed on the barrier. Seeing his actions, I was startled and wanted to stop him. In the Peng Lai immortal region, witchcraft energy was suppressed and couldn't be used. Although the sacrificial evil spirit's cultivation was high, his power wasn't as strong as mine. Moreover, the barrier of the Peng Lai immortal region was extremely powerful. If he acted rashly, he might be counterattacked. As soon as I stopped him, the sacrificial evil spirit's hand had already passed through the barrier and reached the other side. I was dumbfounded again. I didn't expect this at all. It seemed that the Peng Lai immortal region was difficult to enter but easy to get out. There were endless obstacles on the way in, but it was easy to get out. Since that was the case, I didn't waste any more time and followed the sacrificial evil spirit out. When we got outside, we saw that the sky was already dark. A helicopter was hovering not far from us. It was the helicopter that Han Wunan had left here to pick us up. Seeing us, the helicopter quickly flew over and opened the hatch to let us in. After getting on the helicopter, someone asked where the sacrificial evil spirit was. After I told him the truth, he didn't ask anything and directly drove the helicopter to return. After returning to the hotel, I directly packed my luggage and left. However, I didn't go back to Shenzhen. Instead, I went to the Jingchu land. Calculating the time, it was almost time for me to meet Lao Ai in half a year. I naturally wouldn't miss it. Speaking of the Fire God Temple, I recalled the silver-eyed man from back then, who was also Shang-Chi. The last time I went there, I didn't see him, and I didn't know if he was still in the Fire God Temple. A few days ago, I met Wang Hai in the Spirit Lock Tower and wanted to tell Shang-Chi about it. After all, Wang Hai was his descendant. On the way south, when I had nothing to do, I couldn't help but think about Lao Ai. I didn't know how she had been in the past 6 months. Had she been reading ancient scrolls and waiting for the meeting on the Magpie Bridge every 6 months? When I saw Yi Pianpian in the Peng Lai immortal region, I thought more about Lao Ai. Yi Pianpian could only be considered a passerby in my life, but Lao Ai was different. Ever since I was a teenager, she had been by my bedside every night. All of my fantasies and expectations about women had been pinned on her. Later on, she had led me on this path, and I had gradually discovered my hidden identity. It could be said that from the first time we met, my life had been intertwined with Lao Ai and couldn't be separated. If it weren't for the so-called heavenly path, Lao Ai and I would have been living together by now. When I first found out that the heavenly path was obstructing us, I couldn't control the anger in my heart. Now, my heart was much calmer, but I didn't dare to forget the oath I made. My mind became more resolute. It was just that in the past 6 months, my cultivation had stagnated due to the instability of my foundation due to the rapid advancement of my cultivation. I hadn't advanced for a long time. Now that I had experienced so many things, my temperament and foundation had become much more stable. It was time to improve myself again. Of course, the advancement of cultivation wasn't something that could be decided with just a few words. After meeting Lao Ai this time, I had to put in more effort. At the very least, it was time to meet the Tai Sui in Thailand. As I was thinking about this, we had arrived at the Shenangjia forest area. It was late at night and the scenic area was naturally closed. After I got off the car with the evil priest spirit, I flew up and rushed all the way. Not long after, we arrived outside the Fire God Temple. Perhaps it was because of the homesickness, I was a little nervous as I looked at the Fire God Temple hidden in the darkness. I stood there in silence. After a long time, I exhaled and stepped in. In the Fire God Temple, it was silent. On the red platform, the red chair was still there. However, there was no one in the hall and the contract hadn't appeared. There were still a few days before Lao Ai would appear. I wasn't in a hurry. I let the evil priest spirit do as he pleased while I went to my bedroom to meditate. I meditated for 3 days. At noon on the 3rd day, I opened my eyes. Before I could get up, I heard a voice from behind me. "Husband." It was still a gentle and deep voice. It was calm and otherworldly, as though she hadn't waited for half a year and was just welcoming her husband who had left in the morning. My heart was instantly filled with sweetness. I stood up and slowly turned around. She was still wearing the red wedding dress from back then, and she still had the same gentle smile. Looking at her now, all the matters in my heart were tossed aside. All the filth that I had experienced in the past 6 months had been washed clean. I didn't say anything and neither did she. She slowly walked in front of me and hugged me with her soft and cold body. On the way here, I had so many things that I couldn't wait to say to her. However, after seeing her, I didn't want to say a single word. I just wanted to freeze this happiness and satisfaction forever. At this moment, saying anything would be a blasphemy against this happiness. After an hour, the greed in my heart eased a little. I moved my arm slightly and Lao Ai came out of my embrace. She was still smiling as she asked me about what I had experienced in the past 6 months. Ever since I had stepped on the path of cultivation, I hadn't lived a peaceful life. Although it had only been half a year, I had experienced many things. Lao Ai and I sat down and picked up some trivial things, telling her bit by bit. There was no light source in the bedroom. We didn't care about the sky outside and just talked. When we talked about dangerous things, I didn't avoid it and Lao Ai didn't worry about it. Her eyes were full of heartache. When we talked about other things, such as the rescue of Yi Piampian, Lao Ai smiled and gave a brief comment. "She's a good woman." I smiled back at her. "Is she as good as you?" I didn't know why, but the smile on Lao Ai's face grew wider. She nodded affirmatively. "Yes, as good as me. If I had a choice, I would naturally want to forget everything and stay here with Lao Ai forever. However, we couldn't do what ordinary couples were used to doing. Happy times were always short. The next day, Lao Ai got up early and prepared food for me like the most ordinary wife. After the meal, we cleaned up the dishes and sat for a while before discussing the next meal. Lunch was naturally the best time to eat after noon, but we couldn't do that. We started to prepare the meal early. She was the chef and I was the assistant. I had never done kitchen chores before, so it was inevitable that I was clumsy. Lao Ai, on the other hand, wasn't a woman who often handled pots and pans. He had planned to finish the meal at noon, but he only managed to finish it when it was already noon. Lao Ai stood by the dining table and reached out to touch my cheek with a smile. Her voice was still soft, but the sadness of parting couldn't be concealed. She said, "Hubby can only eat this meal alone." I nodded, but I couldn't say anything. Lao Ai wanted to say something, but her figure had already blurred. She didn't even give me time to linger and disappeared in the blink of an eye. I didn't say anything until I couldn't find a trace of red in front of me. Then, I sat down and carefully ate all the food on the dining table. Afterward, I got up and looked around the small bedroom before turning to leave. Even after I left the fire god temple, the silver-eyed man still hadn't appeared. Naturally, I couldn't tell him about Wang Hai. On the other hand, the sacrificial evil spirit, who had disappeared earlier, was standing outside waiting for me. After seeing me, he didn't ask about the past few days, nor did he ask about Lao Ai. He just nodded at me and turned to walk in the direction he had come from. After leaving the fire god temple, I arrived at the Shenangjia scenic area. Just as I was thinking about whether or not to return to Shenzhen, the phone in my pocket rang. Recently, I had almost stopped using my phone. There were only a few people who knew my number, and almost all of them had the voice-transmitting talisman that I had given them. Usually, when I contacted them, I used the voice-transmitting talisman. I rarely used my phone. That was why I felt strange when I heard my phone ringing. When I took it out, I saw that it was an unfamiliar number. Puzzled, I pressed the answer button. As soon as I put the phone to my ear, I heard a hurried voice of a woman. "Hello, Mr. Zhou? You finally picked up. I'm Fong Min. Do you remember me, Mr. Zhou?" The person spoke quickly, and I didn't find Fong Min's name familiar. As I was about to deny it, the voice on the phone rang again. "A few years ago we met on a train. At that time, I was a red and white escort. As soon as I heard the words red and white acquaintances, I suddenly remembered something. A few years ago, after I was chased by Liang Tianxin, I was on my way home from Shenangjia to celebrate the New Year. At that time, I saw Fong Min on a train. At that time, she was telling someone a story. In the middle of the story, she mentioned her job as a red and white escort. She also mentioned a strange incident that she had experienced. It was because I had overheard her story that I gave her my phone number. However, the incident that I had heard at that time was very strange. I knew that if she got involved in this matter, something bad would happen to her soon. That was why I gave her my phone number to sow good karma. However, a few years had passed, and I hadn't received any news from her. I thought that the incident that year was most likely because she had met with a calamity and was no longer in this world. I didn't expect that I would receive her message at this time. Chapter 797. Fong Min's voice was still hurried on the phone. She said that every night, she would dream of an old man staring at her. He didn't talk and his dark eyes scared her. Moreover, this dream lasted for many days. She couldn't eat or sleep well. She had previously worked as a red and white guest, so she had heard a lot about ghosts and evil spirit. After this happened, she quickly went to find someone to ask for a talisman. When she slept at night, she put it on her chest to ensure her safety. It was good that she didn't ask for the talisman. That night, the old man appeared again. At the same time, Fong Min felt a burning pain in her chest. She opened her eyes and found that the talisman on her chest was burning. She hurried to put out the fire, but only half of the talisman was left. When the talisman caught fire, Fong Min felt that it was even more dangerous. She didn't dare to close her eyes that night. The next morning, she dragged her tired body to find the Taoist priest who had given her the talisman. She wanted to find another way. Unexpectedly, as soon as she finished her story, the Taoist priest looked frightened. He didn't say anything and ran away. Fong Min didn't know what to do in this situation. She didn't have any other way to find someone who knew about this. In a hurry, she remembered me and called me to ask for help. After listening to her story, I furrowed my brows. I didn't need to think too much to know that an evil ghost was behind this. As soon as it appeared, it made the talisman burn without any wind. This evil ghost had at least a ghost general realm cultivation base. It was amazing that Fong Min could endure for several days after provoking such a ghost. However, there was something I couldn't understand. That year, when I saw Yin energy moving around Fong Min's glabella, I was sure that old Yuan's ghost had locked onto her. Soon, she would be in trouble. After that, I could understand whether she died a violent death or was she safe and sound. However, several years later, something happened to her again. What was the reason? Was this evil ghost a new encounter, or was it a legacy of old Yuan? If it was a new encounter, although this evil ghost's cultivation base wasn't ordinary, it wouldn't be difficult for me to deal with it with my current cultivation base and the evil sacrificial spirit. But if it was the legacy of old Master Yuan, who was buried in the vat, then it would be even more dangerous now. At that time, my cultivation was not high. When I heard about the vase burial, I felt that my mortal body would not be able to withstand it. In addition, when old Master Yuan died, he was already showing signs of turning into a corpse. Under these two effects, evil spirits would definitely be born. Over the years, as my cultivation has increased, I have thought about this matter many times. I only feel that the ruthlessness hidden in this matter is far greater than what I originally thought. When the old man died, he showed signs of turning into a corpse. To a large extent, it was because he was still breathing when he died and was in the state of the living dead. After that, he was buried with Buddhist rites and his soul was difficult to disperse. At this time, his soul was in a strange state between life and death, trapped in the vat coffin. It was hard to predict what would happen. While I was deep in thought, Fong Min's voice became more sorrowful. She begged me to save her. I met Fong Min by chance in the past. Fong Min and I could be considered to have some good karma. Now that she came to me for a favor, I naturally couldn't refuse her. Moreover, I was quite interested in the evil spirit buried in the vat. Thus, I agreed on the phone and asked her to send me a detailed address. I would rush over as soon as possible. After parting with Lao AI, I planned to go to Shenzhen to prepare for the trip. Then, I would go to the royal palace in Thailand to find the Black Knight, exhilarating. However, since this had happened, I decided to postpone my trip to Thailand. After I hung up the phone, I told the evil spirit about what had happened. He didn't know anything about Buddhism, so he wasn't interested in the jar burials. If you need to go, you can go. He doesn't have any objections. While we were talking, I received Fong Min's message. I read it carefully and memorized the address. Then, I turned and headed to Min Province. Fong Min's address was in the capital of Min Province. We went all the way south. At noon the next day, we arrived in Min Province. After we got out of the car, the evil sacrificial spirit and I didn't rest. We followed Fong Min's address and found a shabby tube-shaped apartment. We went to the third floor and knocked on the door of the room Fong Min had mentioned. I had been knocking for 5 minutes, but no one came to open the door. I frowned. Is Fong Min not home? Or did something happen to her? After thinking for a while, I closed my eyes and used my divine sense to sense the room. Soon, I found someone in the room. From her aura, I knew it was Fong Min, whom I had met before. Moreover, from her aura, everything was normal. I felt strange. Why didn't she come to open the door if everything was normal? However, I soon got it. She must have been frightened by the nightmares she had experienced in the past few days. I didn't inform her before I came. That was why she didn't hear me when I knocked on the door. After figuring it out, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I didn't bother to call her, so I directly sent her a voice transmission, telling her that I was knocking on the door. Don't be afraid and come to open the door. With my current cultivation, using the sound transmission technique was nothing to me. However, Fong Min was just an ordinary person. She was probably scared out of her wits when the voice suddenly appeared next to her ear. After dawdling for another 2 minutes, she finally walked over and opened the door. After she opened the door, I saw that although Fong Min's body was still as plump as before, her aura was completely different. At this moment, her hair was disheveled, and her beautiful face had lost its color. She was wearing pajamas which had oil stains on them. It seemed she hadn't changed her clothes for a long time. She hadn't told me how long the ghost in the dream had tortured her. However, from the looks of it, I guessed it had been at least half a month. Fong Min had changed in the past few years, and so had I. After opening the door, Fong Min gazed at me for a while. When her memories overlapped with reality, she suddenly cried. Mr. Zhou, I don't know what to do. You have to save me. While crying, she threw herself at me and tried to get into my arms. Although I didn't care about the etiquette between men and women, I didn't mind hugging and comforting her. However, from Fong Min's expression, I knew she wanted to throw herself at me and use her beauty to entertain me. I extended my hand and stopped her. I nodded indifferently and said, I will save you. Let's go into the room and talk about the details. Fong Min stopped and wiped her tears. Then, she turned around and invited us into the house. As soon as we entered the room, I smelled the strong smell of alcohol. The room was littered with empty bottles. Fong Min noticed my strange expression. She apologized and put the empty bottles on the sofa away. Then, she opened the window to let in some fresh air. After the smell of alcohol had dispersed, I sat down on the sofa and asked her for the details. First, I asked her about the time of the nightmare. According to Fong Min, the nightmare started at the end of last month. It had been almost a month since then. After confirming the time, I told her about Old Man Yuan's burial in the vat. I asked Fong Min to recall her nightmares to see if they were related to that incident. Hearing me mention it, Fong Min's pale face turned even paler. After a while, she said, Actually, I also think that the old man in the nightmare is a bit like the old man from the Yuan family. But it's been a few years since that happened, and I only saw his appearance after he died, so I'm not sure. I sighed. I was wondering if it was related to that incident. But now, after seeing Fong Min's face, I was sure of it. It was Old Man Yuan who had turned into a ghost. After several years, he found Fong Min one more time. However, this made my previous doubts even stronger. What had happened that made that evil ghost wait for years to find Fong Min? Moreover, after finding her, he didn't take her life directly. Instead, he slowly tortured her like a blunt knife cutting her flesh. Logically speaking, Fong Min did have to bear the greatest responsibility for what had happened back then. However, emotionally speaking, Fong Min was just an outsider. Old Man Yuan had to suffer because of his unfilial children and grandchildren. No matter what, he wouldn't vent his anger on Fong Min. Could it be that Fong Min had deliberately concealed some of the evil deeds she had done? With that thought in mind, I asked Fong Min to tell me what had happened that year. I also emphasized that she couldn't hide anything. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to save her life. After listening to her story, it was exactly the same as what she had told me that year. I also thought about it. Fong Min was just a guest. She didn't have any grudge against Old Man Yuan's family. She wouldn't have done anything that would anger the heavens. Now I was convinced that Fong Min was telling the truth. However, I didn't know what to do. I couldn't find the root of the problem. After thinking for a long time, I told Fong Min, "Don't worry. Tonight, I'll enter her dream and meet that old man." Ghosts could appear in people's dreams. My cultivation base wasn't lower than a young god's, so it was easy for me to enter her dream. Fong Min gawked and dropped her jaw. She couldn't imagine such a thing. When I arrived, it was already afternoon. After talking for a long time, the sky was getting dark. When Fong Min finished cooking, it was already late at night. Fong Min had been tortured for several days, and she was exhausted. She was afraid that she couldn't sleep. Now that I was here, she relaxed a lot. She lay down on the sofa and soon fell asleep. Not long after that, I saw Fong Min furrowing her brows. It seemed she had entered her dream. I nodded at the evil sacrificial spirit, asking him to enter Fong Min's dream with me to see what was going on. Of course, the evil sacrificial spirit didn't refuse. However, he wasn't in a hurry. He waved his hand and arranged a thick barrier that covered the entire room. At this moment, we were in a strange place, so we had to be careful. I didn't think about this. However, the evil sacrificial spirit was meticulous. After he had set up the barrier, the two of us simultaneously placed our hands on Fong Min's forehead. Then, we closed our eyes and connected our consciousness to Fong Min's dream. As soon as we entered, I lifted my head and saw a figure shrouded in layers of mist. However, no matter how hard I tried to look, I couldn't see it clearly. It was obvious that my cultivation base couldn't break through the mist protecting the evil ghost's body. At first, I thought that this ghost only had a ghost general cultivation base. But now, it seemed I had underestimated it. Fortunately, the evil sacrificial spirit was here. I didn't waste my time and turned to ask the evil sacrificial spirit, "How strong is this ghost?" The evil sacrificial spirit answered me. "This ghost has the power of the peak of the Yang God realm." Peak of the Yang God realm. Hearing these words, I couldn't help but be startled. It was much harder for ghosts to cultivate than for living people. It had only been a few years since Grandpa Yuan had been buried, but he had reached such a realm. I had never heard of such a thing before. At this moment, the evil spirit also noticed us. The figure shrouded in the mist turned to look at us and asked in a sinister voice, "Who are you?" Of course, the evil sacrificial spirit didn't pay attention to him. I thought for a while, then said, "Ghosts have their own paths, and people have their own paths. What happened to Grandpa that year was related to Fong Min's mishandling of the matter, but it has been so many years. He should have let it go. Why did he cause trouble again today?" I asked this question because I wanted to know the reason and to confirm the old man's identity. Fong Min hadn't told me the details, so I wasn't sure yet. At this moment, the evil spirit lifted his leg and walked out of the fog, and his cold voice sounded, "Why do I need to explain my actions to you?" I was bewildered when I heard his answer. He seemed to have admitted his identity, But why did he call himself this old monk? Before I could figure it out, his figure emerged from the mist. The first thing I saw was a big, shiny head. Old Man Yuan's evil spirit had a bald head, and there were several scars on it. Counting them carefully, there were at least 9 of them. As far as I knew, besides the tonsure ceremony, Buddhists also had the heart-cleansing ceremony. After they entered the temple and studied for a while, the old monk would use incense to light the first scar on their monk's head. It was called the heart-cleansing ceremony. Then, in the next 1 or 2 years, if their performance was good, they would receive a second scar, which was called lufu. Generally speaking, if everything went well, the senior monks in the temple could have 5 or 6 scars, while the abbots of important temples could have 8 or 9 scars. Chapter 798. While I was puzzled, old Yuan walked past me and stared at the evil sacrificial spirit standing 1 step behind me. Then, his face changed. Without saying a word, he turned around and returned to the mist, disappearing in just a blink of an eye. I hurried to chase after him. However, not only old Yuan, but even the mist around him had disappeared. But strangely, at the place where the mist dispersed, I actually faintly noticed a fluctuation that was a mixture of shaman qi and Dao qi. This feeling was truly too familiar because I cultivated both shaman qi and Dao qi at the same time. But at the same time, I was extremely shocked because I knew very well that this aura wasn't emanated from my body, but the aura left behind by the mist around Old Man Yuan. I wasn't sure, so I asked the evil sacrificial spirit to come and sense it. Apparently, he had also sensed this aura. He frowned in surprise. At this moment, I didn't know what to do. I shook my head and didn't want to think about it. I asked the evil sacrificial spirit to leave Fong Min's dream. When we got out, Fong Min hadn't woken up yet. However, her twisted face had calmed down. She had been tortured for a long time, so of course, she was tired. We didn't wake her up and just sat there, talking about the aura we had sensed in her dream. Dao energy was common, and I wouldn't be surprised if I sensed it on anyone. However, shaman energy was different. Including me Tai, the number of people I knew who cultivated shaman energy in this world could be counted on one hand. Not many people cultivated shaman energy, so how could this ghost have shaman energy cultivation base? Was it a coincidence that he had absorbed shaman energy from somewhere? If that was the case, it could be explained. However, besides shaman energy, he also had the aura of Dao energy. Could he be like me and cultivate shaman energy and Dao energy at the same time? It was impossible. Although shaman energy and Dao energy had the same origin, they couldn't be cultivated at the same time. Because of my special identity, even if this ghost had a great opportunity, it couldn't be the same as mine. I didn't know what was going on, so I turned to ask the evil sacrificial spirit to see what he had to say. The evil sacrificial spirit kept silent for a while and then said hesitantly, "That ghost's aura doesn't seem to be the power of the origin. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to wander around. It was very likely that he had absorbed both sorcerer qi and Dao qi from somewhere, and that was why he had ended up like this." His theory was similar to my guess, but I didn't know what was going on. I had to wait for Fong Min to wake up and ask her to see if I could get any useful information. This wait lasted for several hours. When Fong Min woke up, it was already the next morning. I heard some noises, so I pulled myself out from my cultivation. When I opened my eyes, I saw that Fong Min looked much better than before. After she woke up, I asked her, "Dao, did you see anything strange in your dream?" With the 2 of us here, Fong Min's dream was naturally different from before. But after she repeated it, it was exactly the same as what we saw last night, and there was nothing unusual. Fong Min was just an ordinary person and could not sense the aura of Dao witchcraft. Asking her this question was like asking for fish from a tree. I thought for a while and decided to change the angle. I asked her to tell me everything that had happened after old Yuan had been buried that year. For old man Yuan to have such an aura, it was naturally a good fortune after his death. Perhaps he could find some clues from what happened after his death. When he had asked Fong Min to recount what had happened in the past, he had mainly talked about what had happened when old man Yuan had been buried. As for what had happened after the burial, he had not gone into detail. Seeing my serious expression, Fong Min didn't dare to ask more. She thought for a moment, then started to talk. The result was the same as what I had heard about old Yuan punishing his children and grandchildren. After that, Fong Min told me that she also felt restless because of what I had said to her on the train. Next year, when we arrived in Fuzhou, although she no longer worked as a receptionist, she still went to old Yuan's grave and kowtowed to ask for forgiveness. She burned joss sticks, candles, and paper money, begging for old Yuan's forgiveness. After that, she also paid attention to old Yuan's house. In addition to old man Yuan's eldest son breaking his leg, in the following months, a lot of things happened to the younger generation of his family, but none of them were life-threatening. Apparently, old Yuan had punished his unfilial descendant. Although it didn't look serious, Fong Min was scared that ghosts were involved. She had even prepared herself to be punished. However, nothing happened as time went by. After a long time, she finally calmed down. She thought that old Yuan hadn't taken his revenge on her. Now, she understood that she hadn't been able to hide from him. Old Yuan had come to find her. At this point, Fong Min's tears streamed down her face. Her entire body was trembling. It was obvious that she was recalling what had happened in the past few days. I could see that after 1 month of torture, Fong Min's mind was on the verge of collapse. If she hadn't found me, she would have gone crazy soon. Old Yuan wouldn't have needed to do anything to her. Seeing her in such a state, I couldn't ask more questions. I had to comfort her. It took me a while to calm her down. After Fong Min had calmed down, I went to discuss with the evil sacrificial spirit. This time we had an idea. Since we couldn't get any information from Fong Min, we had to go to old Yuan's grave to check. If he had changed after his death, there should be some clues left in his grave. With that thought, I felt excited. Because I am the product of the union between monster monarch puppet and emperor Ku, I am able to dual cultivate in witchcraft and Taoism. Regardless of the reason for this old man Yuan, he possesses both Taoist qi and witchcraft qi at the same time. It makes me feel that I am not alone. This trip to Min province was the right choice. After making up my mind, I told Fong Min that if we wanted to solve this, we had to go to old Yuan's grave. When Fong Min heard me, her face paled. She was scared of old Yuan's tomb. However, she gritted her teeth and nodded. She understood that fear couldn't solve anything. Eventually, she would have to face it. It was still early, so we didn't want to linger. After breakfast, we left for old Yuan's village. After that incident, Fong Min had changed jobs. Moreover, she was scared after the incident, so she had moved to another place. Her current place was quite far from old Yuan's village. On the way, we didn't mention the incident again. We deliberately talked about some relaxing topic. However, Fong Min's tense nerves couldn't relax. The more we talked about old Yuan's grave. Around dusk, we finally reached old Yuan's village. After we got out of the car, we didn't go to old Yuan's house. Fong Min knew where old Yuan was buried, so she took us directly to his grave. As soon as we reached the grave, I felt a wisp of yin energy in the air. Without waiting for Fong Min to speak, I pointed at a barren grave around 10 meters away from us. Old Yuan's grave should be over there, right? We were surrounded by a graveyard. Besides old man Yuan's grave, there were 7 or 8 other graves. Fong Min was amazed and nodded repeatedly when I confirmed it. The yin energy in the air mainly came from that grave. Moreover, there wasn't any grass growing on the grave, which was a sign of thick yin energy. I didn't need to think too much to know that this was old Yuan's grave. We quickened our pace and stopped in front of old Yuan's grave. Out of instinct, I walked around the grave a few times to observe the geomancy of the surroundings. There was neither good sand nor good water around the grave. The layout wasn't good, but it didn't look dangerous. It was just an ordinary grave. There was nothing strange about it. However, there were some rolling stones in the grass not far from the grave, which piqued my interest. Those stones had the same shape and size, and they were arranged in a certain way. I walked around the area and sensed the aura. Gradually, I understood something. Those stones weren't rolling stones. They were arranged around old Yuan's grave, creating a simple scattering formation. It seemed the descendants of the Yuan family had found someone to deal with this matter after they had encountered a disaster. Moreover, they were lucky that the geomancy master they had found wasn't a swindler. Although this scattering formation was simple, it was very practical. It could disperse the energy in the grave. Normally, with a scattering formation to disperse energy, even if there were ghosts in the grave, they wouldn't be able to cause a big commotion. However, in old Yuan's grave, the stones of the scattering formation were covered in moss. It had been some time, but it was incredible that old Yuan's soul had cultivated to the peak of Yang God realm. I walked to the grave and rubbed the soil on it. Normally, soil that had been soaked in energy for years should be very hard, just like the wall outside the energy passage in the corpse sect. However, the soil on old Yuan's grave was soft, and its color was the same as the surrounding soil. It looked like the qi had been almost dispersed by the dispersing array. The more I looked at it, the more I couldn't understand it. There were many strange things about old Yuan's grave. I asked Feng Min to stand in the distance while I discussed with the evil sacrificial spirit. The evil sacrificial spirit waved his hand and shook his head. If we can't see it from the outside, let's look inside. Then, he swung his hand. A wisp of spirit energy emerged from his sleeve and turned into a sharp blade. He slashed the soil under his feet, creating a 10-centimeter gap. Chapter 799. As soon as the crack appeared, I instantly sensed the presence of the true dragon qi. When I got closer, I was even more certain that the true dragon qi was drifting out from the crack. Moreover, it was incomparably pure. It seemed that there was a true dragon vein hidden in the tomb. I couldn't help but turn to look at the evil sacrificial spirit. I had been observing Old Man Yuan's tomb for a long time, but I could only sense a little bit of energy. However, the evil sacrificial spirit had directly created a crack. It was obvious that he had sensed the existence of the true dragon qi inside. My cultivation base wasn't as high as the evil sacrificial spirits. Moreover, living people in the secular world would inevitably have vulgar air and negative karma. The evil sacrificial spirit was a soul that had been refined by the 9 serenities blood. It had long gotten rid of its negative karma, so it was normal that its perception wasn't as good as the evil sacrificial spirits. Since its perception was strong, I directly asked it if there was a true dragon vein under this tomb. After hearing my question, the evil sacrificial spirit didn't hesitate and directly shook his head. I frowned and pondered for a while. I agreed with his answer. True dragon veins were rare in this world, and the geomancy of a place where a true dragon vein could be found must be marvelous. I had checked the geomancy of this tomb, and it was very ordinary. It didn't have the conditions to produce a true dragon vein. Moreover, the true dragon qi in this crack had an ethereal feeling, which was completely different from the true dragon qi I had seen before. From this point, I could rule out the possibility of a true dragon vein below. If it were someone else, they wouldn't dare to judge a true dragon vein based on their feelings. However, I was different. I had seen more true dragon veins than ordinary Yang God celestial masters. Especially when I was in the Blessed Enclave, the 4 true dragon veins of the Wanwu Wonderland were available for me to cultivate at any time. When the true dragon veins of the Blessed Enclave were redistributed, I had plucked several hundred true dragon veins and kept a lot of them. Thus, I was very familiar with the true dragon veins. After confirming that there was no true dragon vein below, I began to have doubts. If there was no true dragon vein, where did such pure true dragon chi come from? I recalled that when I was in the Langya platform, there was also the true dragon chi under the underground palace. At that time, I mistakenly thought that there was a true dragon vein below, but after I got there, I found that the imperial seal only had a large amount of true dragon chi. The current situation was quite similar to that of the Langya platform. It was very likely that some kind of artifact that contained a large amount of true dragon chi was also buried below. But if that was the case, I couldn't understand it. This place was different from the Langya stage. It was not a place of immortals, but merely the tomb of Old Man Yuan. According to Fang Min's description, Old Man Yuan's soul had lingered after his death, and he had unintentionally used the Buddhist burial technique. There were no rare treasures involved at all. Excluding the fact that it was naturally formed and rare treasures, there was only one explanation for the true dragon chi here. It must have been deliberately created by someone. In other words, someone must have intentionally injected the true dragon chi into the tomb. Old Man Yuan's change must have something to do with it. According to this conjecture, everything was much easier to explain. They were just being manipulated by someone. But even so, I still had a question in my mind. Previously, in Fang Min's dream, Old Man Yuan's body clearly emitted the dual aura of Dao Qi and Sorcerer Qi. At this time, there was only the true dragon Qi here, but no Sorcerer Qi. Why was it so? I thought about it. Old Man Yuan was a Yin soul, and he cultivated some techniques similar to the divine connecting technique that I had taught Tong Tong. I could understand that, but the Sorcerer Qi was different. It couldn't be improved through cultivation. It could only be obtained from the rare Tai Sui's corpse. Old Man Yuan's cultivation base was definitely related to this tomb. However, there was no Sorcerer Qi in this tomb, and it was impossible for the Tai Sui to exist. So, where did the Sorcerer Qi on his body come from? Could it be that the true dragon Qi from this crack could be transformed into Sorcerer Qi? Speaking of this, I suddenly remembered the great formation in Wangu Cave that could transform true dragon Qi into Sorcerer Qi. But soon I shook my head. There was indeed such a formation in the Wangu Grotto Heaven. However, that formation was set up by the Wang family's ancestor with the power of an immortal. When it was converted, it even used the power of 4 true dragon veins. Compared to 4 true dragon veins, this bit of true dragon chi could not even be mentioned in the same breath. Moreover, I couldn't explain the 9 ring scars on Old Man Yuan's head. No matter if it was the true dragon veins or the Sorcerer Qi, they had nothing to do with Buddhism. So, where did he get those ring scars? After pondering for a long time, I couldn't figure it out. Right at this moment, the sound of chanting came from a distance. Since Old Man Yuan looked like a monk, I was very sensitive to the sound of chanting. I stopped thinking and turned to look at the source of the sound. The source of the sound was the Yuan family village where Old Man Yuan lived. After listening carefully for a while, I recognized that it was the original vows scripture of Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva that I had chanted in the Spirit Lock Tower to help the twin Rakshasas. It was obvious that someone had passed away in the Yuan family village. Old Man Yuan's soul was stirring up trouble, and someone had passed away in the Yuan family village. It was hard not to connect the two events. After thinking for a while, I decided to go there to check to see if the two events were related. I asked the evil sacrificial spirit to go there with me. As for Fang Min, it wasn't convenient for her to follow us. I asked her to wait in the car. Fang Min was smart. She didn't ask what we were going to do. She turned around and left. I took the evil sacrificial spirit along the small path to the village. It was late at night, and the people in the village didn't have many activities to entertain themselves. All the houses had closed their doors. The gate of the courtyard where the Buddhist chants came from was also closed. An exorcism talisman was hung on the gate. If an exorcism talisman was hung on the gate, it was highly possible that something evil had happened. The evil sacrificial spirit and I exchanged looks. Then, we soared into the air and landed on the roof. In the dark of the night, no one would notice us. After standing still, I lowered my head to look at the courtyard. There was a coffin in the middle of the courtyard. The custom here was similar to that in my hometown. Before the funeral, the coffin wasn't sealed. That was why we could see the deceased's face from above. The deceased was a man in his prime. However, it was strange that his face was covered in wrinkles, as if his spirit energy had been sucked away. The first thing I thought of was old Yuan. However, I wasn't sure. The evil sacrificial spirit told me that old Yuan was at the peak of the Yang God realm. With his cultivation base, sucking the spirit energy of ordinary people was just a drop in the bucket. It was better for him to meditate and cultivate. It was strange. With that thought in mind, I turned to look at the memorial tablet in front of the coffin. Usually, before a funeral, the memorial tablet of the deceased was made of yellow paper with the date of birth and the time of death written on it. After the coffin fell to the ground, the memorial tablet would be burned. It would accompany the deceased to the netherworld. It was a kind of identification. Looking at the deceased's birth date and time of death, I subconsciously calculated. Soon, I got a strange answer. The deceased's 5 elements were all fire, and he died around noon. His element was also fire. As such, I seem to have found some clues. Could it be that old man Yuan sucked this person here for the fire attribute? After this discovery, I checked around. However, I didn't find anything valuable. I decided to leave with the evil sacrificial spirit. When we returned to the car, Fong Min was sleeping in the back seat. However, she was whimpering and screaming. Apparently, she had a nightmare. The evil sacrificial spirit and I exchanged looks. Immediately, we placed our hands on Fong Min's forehead. Old Yuan came at the right time. We had a lot of questions that we wanted to ask him. As we had entered this place once, the evil sacrificial spirit and I were familiar with the place. Soon, we reached Fong Min's dream. As soon as we stood still, we saw old Yuan not far from us. This time, he wasn't shrouded in mist like the last time. However, before I could ask him anything, I was surprised. When she saw him yesterday, there were only 9 ring scars on his head. But today there was one more, and it became a total of 10. At the same time, old Yuan's aura seemed to be stronger than the day before. Looking at the 10 scars, I had a flash of inspiration. I remembered the Bodhisattva precepts I had read in the ancient Buddhist scriptures. As far as I knew, the Bodhisattva precepts were one of the 7 precepts: Upasai, Upae, Sami, Samini, Shikakamuni, Bhikkhu, and Bhikkhuni. The Bodhisattva's identity could be within the 7 precepts, but it could also be outside of the 7. The reason why the Bodhisattva precepts was that it covered and surpassed all the other precepts. According to the Buddhist scriptures, the Bodhisattva precepts were the origin of all Buddhas, the foundation of Bodhisattva, and the foundation of all Buddhas. The nature of the Bodhisattva precepts was similar to the 8 precepts. The 8 precepts were also a kind of liberation precepts outside of the 7 precepts. However, the Bodhisattva precepts were similar to the 8 precepts. Simply speaking, the Bodhisattva precepts were the highest symbol of Buddhism. The most obvious feature was the 12 scars on the forehead. Once a Buddhist had 12 scars on the forehead, it meant that he wasn't far from becoming a Buddha. Did old Yuan cultivate the Bodhisattva precepts? In just one day, he had 1 scar. It was hard to say what would happen next. When he had 12 scars, I was afraid that even the evil priest spirit wouldn't be his match. With that thought in mind, I immediately asked the evil priest spirit to capture him. I didn't expect that old man Yuan would be so vigilant. He disappeared before I could finish my sentence. Even with the evil priest spirit's power, he couldn't capture him in a hurry. Feeling helpless, the 2 of us had to leave Fong Min's dream. We sat in the car and began to think about this matter. Although old man Yuan is a ghost, His cultivation process is no different from that of ordinary people. With his cultivation at the peak of the yang spirit realm, it is extremely difficult for him to make further progress. The reason why his cultivation improved overnight is likely to have something to do with the person with the fire attribute we saw before. I told the evil priest spirit about my speculation, but the evil priest spirit shook his head. I was bewildered and thought that I was wrong. However, the evil priest spirit told me that he had the same idea as me. However, I had overlooked one thing. Old Yuan's aura had indeed increased, but it was only his shaman energy that had increased. His Tao energy, on the other hand, had weakened a lot. His shaman energy had increased, but his Tao energy had weakened? If the evil priest spirit hadn't reminded me, I wouldn't have noticed this. Now that I thought about it, it was indeed the case. However, my train of thought, which had just been smoothed out, became muddled again. How could it be? Even the man corpse with the fire element didn't have anything to do with shaman energy. How could old Yuan increase his cultivation base? Or could it be that old Yuan's increase in power had nothing to do with the man corpse? Chapter 800. While I was thinking, more than 2 hours had passed. It was late at night and the village had quieted down. There was no place to investigate. After we had driven old man Yuan away, Fong Min was sleeping soundly. I called her twice, but she didn't wake up. I decided not to go back and stayed in the carriage with the evil sacrificial spirit. While I was cultivating, time flew. Soon, it was the morning of the next day. Fong Min hadn't woken up yet, so I sat cross-legged in the carriage and didn't move. However, while I was cultivating, I spread my spiritual sense. I soon noticed a group of monks at the entrance of the village. They were hurrying toward Yuan family village. I felt strange. Last night, that person had been chanting the Ksitigarbha original vows scripture for most of the night. That person's soul had already been purified. Why were there more monks coming? Could it be that something had happened again? With that thought in mind, I got up and called the evil sacrificial spirit to follow them. When we got close, I saw that the leader of this group of monks was a fat monk with a big body. His eyebrows and beard were glowing, and there was a faint Buddhist halo protecting his body. His cultivation base seemed to be at the glory of consciousness realm. In the secular world, a monk with the cultivation of Shur Yao could completely be called a virtuous and eminent monk. In this small Yuan family village, even if there was a ghost that harmed people, it would normally not be able to invite such a virtuous and eminent monk. Could it be that something extraordinary had happened again? With that thought in my mind, I hurried to follow them with the evil sacrificial spirit. We didn't hide our tracks, and the fat monk in the glory of consciousness realm quickly noticed the two of us. He immediately stopped in his tracks and checked our bodies. Of course, he couldn't recognize the evil sacrificial spirit's cultivation base. I thought for a moment and released my glory of consciousness realm cultivation base. The fat monk looked at me for a few seconds and was surprised. He hurried to walk toward us. When he was in front of us, he clasped his palms together and chanted the name of Buddha. His face looked solemn. Although Monk Miaojue's incident had happened, I didn't have any prejudice against Buddhists. Seeing him greet me, I also clasped my hands to return the greeting. The fat monk saw my behavior, and the solemn expression on his face disappeared. He asked, "This poor monk's Buddhist name is Mingjue. Benefactors, what brings you here?" This monk Mingju is quite smart. He can tell with a glance that we are following him on purpose. With my cultivation level, I can be Monk Mingju Sr., not to mention offering sacrifices to evil spirit. That was why I didn't try to hide anything. I simply told him that I was here to investigate the case of Een spirits harming people. Of course, the matter of true dragon energy and shaman energy was a sensitive topic, so I didn't mention it. Then, I asked Monk Mingju, why did they come here in such a hurry? When Monk Mingju heard this, He stepped aside and signaled for us to walk together. As they walked, they spoke of the purpose of their trip and the situation they had already grasped. According to Monk Ming-ju, 3 people had died in the same way in the 8 villages. All 3 of them had died in the same way. All of them had their essence energy sucked away by ghosts. However, the 3 of them were of different genders and ages, and there was no interaction between them at all. It was as if there was no connection between them. So he thought that the ghost was just doing whatever it wanted to do. In order to prevent more people from getting hurt, he had to go down the mountain and walk around, trying to subdue the ghost. Until yesterday, his disciple sent him a letter, saying that there were people who died in the same way here. That was why he had rushed here overnight and didn't dare to linger. Since Monk Ming-ju was in such a hurry, I thought he already knew the cause of the incident. But now, besides knowing that 3 people had died, he didn't know anything else. I didn't hurry to tell him my guess. Instead, I asked him if he had checked the birthdays of the 3 people who had died. According to my previous guess, those 3 people also had pure elemental fate, and they were killed at the same time. However, it was just my guess. Moreover, I didn't have any clues that could directly connect the scar on the old man's forehead to these things. Monk Ming-ju was surprised when he heard my question. He didn't seem to understand why I had asked him that. However, he quickly answered, I didn't see those corpses, so I didn't pay attention to their birthdays. I just wanted to help them ascend to the afterlife before leaving. He hesitated for a while before telling me that he hadn't sensed the existence of the 3 souls when he had helped the souls ascend to the afterlife. Normally, after a person died, the 3 souls would leave the body, but they wouldn't disappear immediately. They would wait until the 7th day of the afterlife before entering the netherworld to reincarnate. Monk Ming-ju understood this problem. He had gone to ascend to the afterlife before the 7th day of the afterlife. I didn't see the 3 souls before the 7th day of the afterlife. Moreover, I could confirm that old Yuan hadn't just absorbed the energy of those people. He had swallowed the 3 souls at the same time. Was it possible that swallowing the 3 souls had something to do with old Yuan's witchcraft energy? I thought for a while, but I couldn't think of any connection between the 2. While I was deep in thought, we arrived at the yard where the corpses were located the night before. The host seemed to know that Monk Ming-ju was coming. At this moment, he had already prepared a vegetarian meal. He hurried to invite the monks to enter the house and eat. However, when the monks entered, the host was surprised to see me and the evil sacrificial spirit. He didn't know who we were. Monk Ming-ju smiled and explained to the host, "We're experts who have come to solve this matter." This fat monk seemed to have a high prestige. When the host heard him, he was also shocked. He hurried to greet us and led us to the main seat. With my and the evil spirit's cultivation base, we didn't need to be polite with Monk Ming-ju. We sat on the main seat. The food of a farmer's family was also delicious. After eating, Monk Ming-ju got up and said that he wanted to check the corpse first. While walking to the morgue, we asked about the situation when the deceased died. According to the host, the deceased was his younger brother, who had the same mother as him. He was still in his 20s and hadn't gotten married yet. That day, he was the only one at home. When they returned home in the evening, they found his brother lying in the yard. He had been dead for a long time. That was why no one had seen how his brother had died. The evil spirit and I had come to check the corpse last night, so we didn't pay much attention to it. We casually glanced at the corpse. Who would have thought that we would find something? The corpse seemed to be filled with a Buddhist aura. This aura was very weak, and we didn't notice it last night. If we hadn't noticed Monk Ming-ju's Buddhist power when we first saw him, I would have missed it again. I turned to look at Monk Ming-ju. His face didn't change. It seemed he hadn't noticed it yet. As a Buddhist, he should be more sensitive to Buddhist power than I was. However, his cultivation base was too low, so it was normal that he couldn't detect this weak aura. At this moment, Monk Mingju's eyes moved away from the corpse. He turned to me and asked, "Did you find anything?" Old Yuan had a ring scar on his head, which made him look like a monk. The corpse also had a Buddhist aura. Moreover, the people who had come to help the corpse were also a group of monks. Under such a complicated situation, I couldn't help but think that Buddhist people might be involved in this. To make things worse, I wondered if Monk Mingju was related to Old Yuan. After hesitating for a while, I shook my head. I didn't tell him what I had found. Monk Mingju saw that I didn't pay attention to him, but he didn't mind. He turned around and continued to talk to the host. "Have there been any strange incidents around the village?" After listening to me, the host pondered for a while. He looked hesitant, as if something strange had happened. Seeing this, I immediately focused on him and listened to what he was saying. According to him, on the day of his brother's death, he was working in the field when he suddenly heard the sound of a bell. It lasted for a few seconds before it stopped. At that time, he was very puzzled. There was no temple nearby. How could he hear the sound of a bell? Moreover, the sound of the bell was strange. It was as if it was ringing right next to his ear, and it was frighteningly loud. However, he was in the middle of the field at that time, and there was no temple or house around. At that time, he thought that he was just too tired and had an auditory hallucination. He didn't think too much about it. Who would have thought that when he got home, he would see his brother's corpse? After listening to him, Monk Mingju was bewildered. He frowned and muttered, "The bell?" While talking, he suddenly lost his composure. He hurriedly asked, "How many times did the bell ring?" His question stunned the host. The host rolled his eyes and began to count seriously with his fingers as he tried to recall. After more than a minute, he stopped and answered uncertainly, "About 10 times." As soon as he said that, Monk Mingju became excited. He continued to ask, "Did you hear the chanting of scriptures again?" This time, the host shook his head. "I didn't hear the chanting of scriptures." After listening to him, Monk Mingju was still excited. His body shivered and he muttered, "Living Buddha? A living Buddha has come to this world." While talking, his face turned from shock to joy. He put his palms together and chanted the name of Buddha. His actions confused me, and I didn't know what he was trying to do. After he calmed down, I frowned and asked him about it. Chapter 801. Buddhists were very particular about ringing the bell. Temples use the bell to perform Buddhist services, summon monks to the main hall, chant sutras, and do homework. In addition, they use the bell to signal waking up, sleeping, and eating. That was why the bell was rung differently for different purposes. However, ringing the bell was also very particular. In the 100 Zhang monastic rules, magical tools, it said, the big bell is the beginning of the forest's signal. Striking at dawn breaks the long night, alerting people to sleep. Striking at dusk makes them feel dizzy. That was why ringing the bell at dawn and dusk required 108 consecutive strikes. 108 strikes were related to the word 9, which had a very high and auspicious meaning. 12 times the word 9 was 108, which pushed the concept of 9 to the extreme. The Buddhist bell was used to pray, influence, and release sentient beings from the afterlife. The temple's bell was rung once in the morning and once at dusk. Each time, it would be rung 18 times, then another 18 times. This repeated twice for a total of 108 times. Whether it was for Buddhist services or homework, as long as the bell was rung, one had to chant sutras. However, there was only one situation that didn't apply that way. During the advancement, there couldn't be any noise in the temple. The temple had to wait for the Buddha's blessing. That was why Monk Mingju had asked if the bell was accompanied by the chanting of sutras. As for why he was so surprised and even mumbled something, it was because when a Buddhist disciple advanced, the bell would ring 9 times at most, which corresponded to the monk's scar on his forehead. It also represented his status in the temple. If the bell rang 9 times or more, that person would have the power to become a bodhisattva, and the day he would become a Buddha was just around the corner. After listening to Monk Mingjua's explanation, and recalling the 10 scars on old Yuan's forehead, I was almost certain that the bell the master heard was related to old Yuan. The Buddhist aura on the corpse, the bell rang 10 times, and the 10 scars on old Yuan's forehead. It wasn't a coincidence. I was afraid I had to find the answer in old Yuan's grave. Fang Min had told me the whole story. Although old Yuan had come out to do evil, he was just an ordinary person. If I had a choice, I wouldn't want to touch his grave. However, I didn't have any other way to solve this situation, so I had to resort to this method. There was no time to waste. After making up my mind, I called the evil spirit and returned to the graveyard. When Monk Mingju saw me move, he didn't hesitate and chased after me. However, before he could get far, the sacrificial evil spirit stopped in his tracks. He frowned and stood on the spot. I was surprised and thought that he had found something. I hurried to ask him. However, the evil spirit told me that he had sensed something strange happening in Chio's tomb. He needed to go back and check. I knew how important Chio's tomb was to the sacrificial evil spirit. Although I was surprised, I nodded and asked him to go back as soon as possible. As for Mr. Yuan, although he is at the peak of the Yang spirit realm, the cultivation of ghosts is slightly lower than that of people in the same realm. I have the help of Tong and the snake spirit, so I can fight against Mr. Yuan. Seeing me nod, the evil spirit nodded and told me to be careful. Then, he flashed and disappeared into thin air. When Monk Mingju saw the sacrificial evil spirit's methods, his eyes widened in fear. It took him a while to recover, but he didn't dare to ask anything. His eyes were filled with surprise. I called him and continued to walk toward our destination. When we arrived, Monk Mingju looked around for a long time. Since the crack the sacrificial evil spirit had created yesterday was still there, he quickly noticed the true dragon energy that was drifting out of it. If one directly absorbed the true dragon energy, it would become the Tao energy that the Taoist and mystical sects talked about. However, for Buddhists, the cultivation power was Buddha power. Monk Mingju asked me curiously, "Why is there Buddhist power surging out of this tomb?" I shook my head and told him that it's true dragon energy, which mostly comes from the true dragon's vein. Unexpectedly, Monk Mingju shook his head. I have good friends from the Taoist and mystical sections. They know about the true dragon's vein. However, the aura that's coming out of this crack isn't true dragon energy. It's the Buddha power of our Buddhist sect. Then, he explained to me in detail that the Buddha power was neutral and calm. It was the purest Buddha power, which was basically the same as the true dragon energy. That's why people who weren't Buddhist disciples would confuse the two. After listening to him, I understood. No wonder I had felt the Buddha aura in this crack. It turned out that the aura that was coming out of this place was Buddha power. When I heard this, I would have been even more surprised. However, considering what I had seen earlier, the Buddha power wasn't strange. Monk Mingju had told me that old man Yuan was about to become a bodhisattva. It was normal for the Buddha power to come out of the tomb. Previously, I had concealed this matter from Monk Mingju. But now that the sacrificial evil spirit had left, I didn't have anyone to talk to. After thinking for a while, I decided to tell him everything. After listening to me, Monk Mingju was dumbstruck. After keeping silent for a while, he said in a trembling voice, "Could it be that this ghost wants to become a bodhisattva?" It sounded ridiculous for a ghost to become a bodhisattva, but from all the signs, it seemed to be the only explanation. However, Buddhism was a peaceful and merciful place. This ghost had killed many people. Even if he became a bodhisattva, he wouldn't be able to wash away his sins. Monk Mingju agreed with me. He nodded and saluted me. Merciful Buddha. The bodhisattva ghost is recorded in our Buddhist scriptures. It's a taboo in our Buddhist sect, and the Lord Buddha won't forgive him. As a Buddhist disciple, I have the responsibility to help him ascend to the afterlife. However, my power is limited. I hope that you can help me eradicate this evil creature. That was the reason I had come here. I hurried to stop Mingju. You don't need to be so polite. After talking to him, we prepared to dig the grave and find out the truth. However, after I told him my plan, Monk Mingju didn't agree. Digging up someone's grave is a big deal. We can't do it rashly. We have to ask for Old Man Yuan's descendants' permission. Although it sounded stubborn, I nodded in agreement after thinking for a while. We didn't dig up the grave but headed to the Yuan village to find Old Man Yuan's descendant. I had to ask Fong Min which family Old Yuan's descendants belonged to. However, before I could go to the car to call her, Fong Min suddenly got out of the car. She looked panic-stricken and staggered toward me. When she reached me, she was panting and couldn't speak for a long time. After she calmed down, I asked her, "What happened?" Fong Min grabbed my sleeve and cried for help. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Seeing her like that, I guessed that Old Man Yuan had come to find her again. After asking around, it was indeed the case. Fong Min said, "When I woke up today, the car was so dark that I couldn't even see my own fingers. I didn't know if it was a dream or reality. Old Man Yuan suddenly appeared. This time, he told me that he would come to take her life at 6:00 p.m. tomorrow." Then, Fong Min got on her knees. She cried and begged me to save her. I pulled her up and comforted her. I promised her that nothing bad would happen to her. Eventually, she calmed down and took us to the Yuan village. Along the way, I thought about what Fong Min had told me. I was surprised. Old Man Yuan had come to see Fong Min again after so many years. However, he had only scared her in her dreams. He hadn't hurt her at all. Why did he suddenly attack her? Moreover, not only did he want to kill her, but he also told me the time. Why? Tomorrow at 6:00 p.m. Is there something special about this time? Thinking about this, I suddenly had a flash of inspiration. I realized something very important. Although I had only seen the time of death of the previous victim, I guessed that the time of death of the previous victims was the same as my own fate. Old Man Yuan had told me the time to take her life. It seemed he had been waiting for this day for more than half a month. Then, I began to calculate the time of tomorrow at 6:00 p.m. After that, I understood Old Man Yuan's plan. Tomorrow would be a Een day. At 6:00 p.m., it would be the hour of the rooster. The hour of the rooster belonged to the Een year and the Een month. It was a Een year, a Een month, a Een day, and a Een hour. After calculating this, I asked Fong Min to tell me her birth date and 8 characters. Seeing how serious I was, she didn't dare to neglect and quickly told me. As she spoke, I started to calculate. After she finished, I had an answer in my heart. Fong Min's birth matrix was of the water element, and water was Een. If Old Master Yuan really succeeded tomorrow, Fong Min would die a violent death. Those who died a violent death were full of resentment, not to mention the fact that 6:00 tomorrow afternoon was the Een year, Een month, Een day, Een hour. Coupled with Fong Min's extremely Een fate, he would probably be filled with resentment. It seemed that Old Master Yuan had his eyes on her for a reason, and he had left her for last. Fong Min must be the most important person. Old Master Yuan did not have a trace of Een Qi on him, so the souls of these people were definitely not meant to be consumed. They should be used for other purposes. In an instant, I thought of something. The 5 people chosen by Old Man Yuan all had single elemental birth providences, representing the purest power of the 5 elements. The 5 elements of Yin and Yang originated from the Taoist theory of Yin and Yang. All things were divided into Yin and Yang and Yang gave birth to Tao. Tao begets 1, 1 begets 2, 2 begets 3, 3 begets all things. Yin and Yang could be transformed into each other, and at the same time, the two were interdependent. Moreover, Old Master Yuan had turned into a Buddhist monk. Both Buddhism and Taoism could lead to enlightenment. Since Old Master Yuan had collected the power of yin and yang and the 5 elements, did he want to use the dead energy to feed the living energy and reverse yin and yang to be reborn? I was startled. Old Master Yuan's real purpose wasn't to become a ghost bodhisattva. He wanted to comprehend the Tao and become a Buddha after being reborn. If that was the case, everything that had happened could be explained. However, I couldn't understand the shaman energy in Old Master Yuan's body. I had never heard of a Buddhist cultivator becoming a Buddha by cultivating shaman energy. When I thought about the connection between Buddhism and shaman energy, I suddenly thought of someone. A few years ago, in the exchange competition in Shenzhen, there was a Thai black-clothed Asian called Arati. He told me that I was the son of heaven and that the shaman energy in my body was the power of 9 spirits. At that time, I thought that the power of 9 spirits referred to the Tai Sui. Moreover, the grand palace he lived in also worshipped the power of 9 spirit. In other words, the grand palace worshipped a Tai Sui. The Thai monks worshipped the power of shaman energy. From this point of view, Buddhism and shaman energy had a close connection. The Buddhism in our country was a foreign force. Moreover, it had only been 1,000 years since then, and the period of the witchcraft's struggle had long passed. That was why I thought that Buddhists couldn't cultivate shaman energy to become a Buddha. Moreover, Arati had said that the 9 spirits were gods, the ultimate. In the words of the Buddhism in our country, it meant becoming a Buddha. Chapter 802. Speaking of the Tai Sui, I couldn't help but think of Shao Jin and the Heavenly Path's corpse from the Yin Corpse sect. The shaman energy in my body came from them. I had been stuck at the middle stage of the Seal Heavenly Master realm for a long time. Aside from the fact that I hadn't found a suitable cultivation technique, the most important reason was that I didn't have a lot of shaman energy to absorb. I guessed that Old Master Yuan's ultimate goal was to become the living Tai Sui, which was a good thing for me. Perhaps I could get a lot of shaman energy from him to increase my cultivation base. However, Shao Jin and the Heavenly Path's corpse had offered their shaman energy to me. I didn't ask for it. Moreover, they were transformed from the stars in the sky. They weren't born through some cruel means. However, Old Master Yuan was different. What he had done was against the natural order of things. He had killed people and taken their souls. This is something that cannot be tolerated by the heavenly Tao. I can understand this. I knew how strong the living Tai Sui was. Even Yen Nantian, who was a Yang God celestial master, couldn't resist it. If Old Master Yuan really got his way, who knew what kind of scene it would be? Although I longed for the shaman energy from the living Tai Sui, I couldn't let Old Master Yuan's scheme succeed. Fortunately, I knew Old Master Yuan's goal. It wasn't too late. We still had time to stop him. However, I didn't understand why he would tell Fong Min when he was going to kill her. He knew that Fong Min would tell me about it. At that time, I wouldn't just stand and watch. Moreover, when he saw the evil sacrificial spirit, he was so scared. As long as the evil sacrificial spirit and I got involved, he wouldn't be able to achieve his goal. Then why did he do this? Could it be that he had other motives? After thinking about this, I suddenly realized that the evil sacrificial spirit wasn't here. I was alone, so I wasn't Old Master Yuan's match. Could it be that Old Master Yuan already knew about this? I seemed to sense a hint of provocation in his words. At this moment, Fong Min was eagerly looking at me. Her chin kept shivering as if she wanted to say something. However, she didn't dare to interrupt my train of thought. Fong Min was the most important part of this. If I wanted to stop Old Master Yuan's scheme, I had to protect her life. But now that the evil sacrificial spirit has left, it will be difficult for me to deal with it alone. However, I still have the snake spirit and Tong Tong. Both of them are Seal Heavenly Masters, so they might be able to fight against Old Master Yuan. Since old Master Yuan had indicated that he would not come to take Fong Min's life until 6 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, she would be safe for the time being. I told Fong Min my plan and told her not to be afraid. As long as she stayed with me, she would be safe. After listening to my words, Fong Min still looked worried. However, she seemed to know that she couldn't do anything about it. She could only trust me, so she nodded and stood on the side without saying anything. Fong Min's words had helped me understand the whole situation. However, I still don't know how he became a monk. Therefore, old Master Yuan's words couldn't change my previous plan. I collected my thoughts and signaled Monk Mingjue to continue walking into the village. Fong Min had been to Grandpa Yuan's house when she was still a guest of the Red and White Guard. That was why we followed her to the place. At this moment, the gate of Grandpa Yuan's house was closed. We had to call him a few times before someone came out. The one who opened the gate was a middle-aged man holding a crutch. From his appearance, I guessed he was the one Fong Min had mentioned before. He was Grandpa Yuan's eldest son, the one with a broken leg. When he saw so many of us, he looked nervous. He didn't let us in but asked, "What's the matter?" I told him the purpose of our visit. After listening to me, the middle-aged man's face stiffened. He cursed loudly and was about to close the gate. I stepped into the house and told him that this matter was related to many people's lives. Then, I explained why his family had so many accidents that year. The middle-aged man seemed to know that there was a reason for what had happened to his family. After listening to me, he was shaken. He invited us to his room to discuss the details. After discussing for a while, the middle-aged man agreed to let us break Grandpa Yuan's grave. We didn't have time to waste. I took the group back to the barren mountain. It was noon, the time of the day when yang energy was the strongest. Fortunately, we had the Yin scattering formation in this place. The Yin energy inside the grave had almost disappeared. We weren't afraid that the Yin energy inside the grave would harm ordinary people. However, to be safe, I asked the others to step back. Monk Mingjue was the only one standing next to me. Breaking a grave was easy for me, and I didn't need to use many tricks. I just wanted to take out the armor-removing sword and slash at the grave. The soft soil on the top of the grave suddenly burst open. The flat ground was now a hole that was several meters deep. I noticed Monk Mingjue's surprised face. It seemed he had never seen this kind of trick before. However, I didn't mind him. I walked to the hole and craned my neck to see. I thought that after I slashed the sword, Grandpa Yuan's body would be exposed. I didn't expect to see such a strange scene. Grandpa Yuan's body wasn't in the grave. There wasn't even a broken piece of the earthen jar. There was a faint yellow barrier with Tao energy. This barrier gave me a familiar feeling, but I couldn't remember where I had seen it before. After seeing this, I had an idea. Fong Min was in charge of Grandpa Yuan's funeral. If someone had placed something in the grave, she would have known. Since Grandpa Yuan's remains weren't in the grave, it meant that someone had secretly moved his remains away after he was buried. Since I couldn't break the barrier with the armor-removing sword, the person who had set up this barrier should be stronger than me. However, if he had moved Grandpa Yuan's remains away, why would he set up this barrier here? Could it be that he wanted to give people the misconception that he was hiding something? This thought popped up in my head. However, I quickly denied it. The crack in the ground that the evil spirit had created was still there, and the faint aura of a true dragon was constantly emitted. In that case, that person might have buried old Master Yuan's remains in a deeper place and left a barrier here to prevent others from finding old Master Yuan's remains. If so, I could conclude that the Yin scattering formation around the grave was also set up by this person. It seemed that old Master Yuan's matter was deliberately done by someone, and old Master Yuan was just a chess piece. However, I didn't know why this person wanted to raise a living Tai Sui fungus. The person who had done this must have something to do with his personal benefit. With that thought, I immediately connected the Thai Buddhism incident to this place. However, it didn't make sense. Why would Thai monks travel tens of thousands of miles to this place? Moreover, how could they understand Taoist techniques and choose Grandpa Yuan's remains? Besides Thai Buddhism, only the shamans had a direct connection with witchcraft energy. Could it be that the people of the shaman tribe had done this place? If that was the case, everything that had happened here could be explained. If the people of the shaman tribe wanted to increase their cultivation base, they needed to use witchcraft energy. However, witchcraft energy was different from Tao energy. Tao energy could be converted into true dragon energy. However, witchcraft energy could only be obtained from the Tai Sui. I knew that there were only two Tai Sui in existence. One was in the Grand Palace of Thailand and the other was Xiao Jin. However, his whereabouts were unknown. If he deliberately hid, no one could find him. If that was the case, the people of the shaman tribe had no choice but to create a living Tai Sui fungus in this place. With that thought, I didn't know if I should continue to stop them or not. I stood still and gazed at the yellow barrier. I was a little bewildered. All of a sudden, I saw something familiar through the yellow light. I didn't dare to jump to a conclusion, so I went closer to see what was going on. After staring at it for more than 1 minute, I remembered that it was the same thing the fatty had used to fight against Monk Miao Ju outside the spirit sealing tower. At that time, the fatty had told me that the formation was a life-saving technique that Jinren Guan had taught him. I guessed it wasn't easy for outsiders to learn this formation. It seemed that the person who had set up the formation was someone from the divination sect. Moreover, this person was related to witchcraft energy. A name popped up in my head, Nangong. His whereabouts were erratic, and his way of doing things was unpredictable. I guessed that he was the one who had done this. Thinking about Nangong, I couldn't help but think that I had something to do with him. According to Nangong's usual behavior, he was always helping me get something. Was it possible that he was training a living Tai Sui fungus for me? Thinking of this, I was overwhelmed with shock. Nangong's methods had been too cruel. He had killed the Laozhan sect's master and made old Yuan transform into a living Tai Sui fungus. I couldn't accept that he treated people's lives as a joke. Even if he succeeded and made old Yuan transform into a Tai Sui fungus, I wouldn't hesitate to kill him. I made up my mind and stood up to shake my body. If the armor-stripping sword couldn't break the barrier, I would have to use my strongest attack. I turned my head and signaled the others to step back. Monk Mingjue wasn't surprised. When Monk Mingjue saw my stern face, he didn't dare to ask anything. He quietly stepped back for dozens of meters. After the others had stepped back, I took out the Xian Yuan sword from my mouth and stepped into the 9-star heavenly dipper. At the same time, my Tao energy continuously flowed into the Xian Yuan sword. Chapter 803. The crack continued to expand, as if it was about to split the entire mountain. A moment later, a deep hole appeared on the mountain. At the bottom of the pit was a huge black vat. After the dust settled, I landed in the hole and looked at the vat. The black vat was floating in the air, and many kinds of auras were moving under it. True Dragon Qi, Buddhist Qi, Yin Qi, and Shaman Qi were evenly distributed on the Taiji diagram below. The Tai Chi diagram was the number 1 diagram in China. From the pillars of the Temple of Confucius's Deshang Hall to the symbols of Laozi's Luguantai, the Three Reeds Palace, and the Baiyun Temple, the Taoist priest's Taoist robe, the fortune-teller's stall, the book covers of Chinese medicine, Qigong, martial arts, and traditional Chinese culture, to the national flag of South Korea, the Singapore Air Force emblem, and the Boer emblem. The Tai Chi diagram was everywhere. It was clear how important the Tai Chi diagram was. The scene in front of me confirmed my previous guess. Yin and Yang gave birth to the Tao, and the Tao gave birth to Yin and Yang. Yin and Yang complemented each other. They could restrict and transform each other at the same time. The true Dragon Qi was a spiritual Qi of extreme Yang, and so was the Buddhist Qi. However, the souls of those people earlier were pure yin qi, which energy wasn't as gentle as true dragon energy, and it wasn't as sharp as yin energy either. It was a kind of spiritual energy in between. The function of the Tai Chi diagram was to mix the pure yin energy with the pure yang true dragon energy and convert them into which energy. However, the Tai Chi diagram and the pure yin and yang energy couldn't be converted into which energy. There had to be a special method, just like the Great Formation in the Wanwu Utopia. After observing for a while, I flew back to the sky and looked down. It did not take me long to see something. The stones scattered around the Tai Chi diagram looked fragmented, but after observing for a while, it wasn't hard to see that they were placed in a very specific position. It was the layout of a formation. Although I hadn't studied the formation in the Wanwu Utopia that could convert which energy, the formation in front of me had the same function. The Wang family's ancestor had spent a lot of effort to create the Great Formation in the Wanwu Utopia, and Nangong's cultivation was clearly inferior to the Wang family's ancestor. To be able to set up such a large formation here, it was unknown how much effort he had put in. Although it was strange that Nangong was Guan Zhenren's junior brother, the Zhanshi faction had always been good at formations. With Nangong's identity, it was understandable that he was proficient in formations. Of course, it was also possible that the formation here was the same as the formation in Wanwu Grotto, and it was unknown how Nangong obtained it. Thinking of this matter was basically straightened out. I heaved a sigh of relief and flew toward the black vat hovering in the air. I was ready to break the formation, but at this moment, a blood-curdling scream suddenly sounded from the foot of the mountain. I turned around and saw Fong Min in the crowd at the foot of the mountain. She was holding her head and rolling on the ground. The scream I had just heard came from her. I cursed under my breath. Old man Yuan must have realized that I was about to take action. In a moment of desperation, he decided to kill Fong Min in advance and take her soul to speed up the transformation process. At this moment, I couldn't care less about the black vat. I turned around and flew toward Fong Min. Blood oozed out of her 7 orifices. She looked really scary. When the people around saw her in this state, they all looked scared. No one dared to go forward to check on her. Only Monk Mingjue knew what was going on. He seemed to understand what had happened. He grabbed Fong Min's hand and kept chanting Buddhist scriptures in an attempt to calm her down. Although Buddhist scriptures could clear one's mind, he was still too weak. Old man Yuan was at the peak of the Yang God realm, and he couldn't resist him. After I landed, I hurried to stop Monk Mingju, asking him to stand to the side to protect me. At this moment, Fong Min didn't have any ghosts around her. Old man Yuan was still haunting her dream. Monk Mingjue nodded and asked all the monks to sit cross-legged, surrounding Fong Min and me. I took a deep breath and pressed Fong Min's hand to calm her down. Then, I placed my hand on Fong Min's forehead and entered her dream. As soon as I stood still, I saw old man Yuan standing in front of me. He was holding an ash-gray object in his hand. It was one of Fong Min's 3 souls. In the Nangong Palace's formation, old man Yuan had lost his mind. I didn't want to talk nonsense with him. I summoned Tong Tong and the snake spirit, asking them to fight with me. Since the enemy was in front of us, the snake spirit wasn't as noisy as it used to be. As soon as it came out, it transformed into its true form and attacked old man Yuan. I was worried that the snake spirit would be at a disadvantage. I hurried to take out the Xian Yuan sword and asked Tong Tong to join the fight. Since I had embarked on the path of cultivation, I had experienced countless battles and had accumulated a lot of experience. Even a lion would use its full strength to fight a rabbit, not to mention that old man Yuan was very strong. That was why I didn't dare to hold back from the beginning. The Xian Yuan sword in my hand was filled with Tao energy. At the same time, my shaman energy was ready in my body. I wanted to attack the second time after the first attack. Tong Tong and the snake spirit were entangled with Old Man Yuan. With my full strength, Tong Tong and the snake spirit, even if Old Man Yuan's cultivation base was much higher than mine, I was confident that I could defeat him. However, after I forced the sword energy out of the Xian Yuan sword, I was dumbfounded. It wasn't that Old Man Yuan was too strong, and the sword energy of the Xian Yuan sword didn't work. It was that Old Man Yuan's strength was much weaker than I had imagined. When he had 9 scars on his head, the evil spirit had told me that his cultivation base was at the peak of the Yang God realm. Now that he had 1 more scar, according to Monk Mingjue, he was only a step away from becoming a Buddha. His strength must have increased again. Although I was confident in this fierce battle, I was also prepared for a bloody battle. Who would have thought that things would turn out like this? While I was thinking, Old Man Yuan had forced the snake spirit and Tong Tong to retreat. He was now attacking me. His hands were covered in thick shaman energy as he slapped at me from a distance. Looking at the approaching shaman energy, I felt a little emotional. I had experienced many battles in my life, but it was my first time facing shaman energy. Instinctively, I wanted to dodge the attack. However, as I was about to dodge, an idea popped up in my head. Old Man Yuan's fighting power didn't seem to be as strong as I had imagined. I could try to use the sky-devouring technique I had just learned to resist this attack. The sky-devouring technique was something I had just learned, and it wasn't appropriate to use it to fight the enemy. However, after the idea popped up in my head, I couldn't suppress it. On the other hand, the sky-devouring technique had devouring power. At this moment, Old Man Yuan's shaman energy was much stronger than mine. If the sky-devouring technique couldn't resist his attack, it would be fine. However, if it could, I would be able to digest all of his shaman energy. My shaman energy cultivation base hadn't improved for a long time. If I could devour his energy this time, it would be a great help to my strength. Many thoughts flashed in my head. After a while, I gritted my teeth. Fortune is found in danger. I will try to block this attack with the heaven-devouring art. If I can't block it, it won't be too late for me to switch to other methods. After all, with Old Man Yuan's attack power, it was impossible for him to kill me in one hit. After confirming it, I didn't hesitate anymore. I stood where I was and didn't try to dodge. I just circulated the sky-devouring technique in my body. Seeing that I didn't move, Old Man Yuan sped up his attack. Just as he was about to hit my chest, the serpent spirit and Tong Tong sped up and tried to stop him. When I saw them, I sent them a telepathic message to stop them. Although the serpent spirit and Tong Tong didn't know what I was planning, they were used to obeying me. When they heard me stop them, they stopped. Soon, Old Man Yuan's palm slammed down on my chest. At this moment, the sky-devouring technique in my body had been activated to the extreme. A suction force came from my chest and sucked the shaman energy from Old Man Yuan's hands into my body. After a few seconds, the shaman energy in his shriveled hands had disappeared. I was a little surprised. On one hand, I had blocked Old Man Yuan's attack. Moreover, it seemed that I had done it with ease. On the other hand, Old Man Yuan was worthy of being the incarnation of the Tai Sui. The pure shaman energy in his body couldn't be compared to that of the sacrificial evil spirit. The sky-devouring technique didn't only have a suction force, but it also had a transformation force. After absorbing the shaman energy, I continued to use the sky-devouring technique. Soon, I had absorbed the shaman energy and sent it to my heaven's veins. I felt so comfortable that I couldn't help but stretch my body. Old Man Yuan was surprised. Of course, he didn't know about the sky-devouring technique, which was a peerless technique. He just retreated slightly and stared at me. However, he couldn't see anything strange. Soon, the doubt on his face turned into anger. His hands were filled with shaman energy again. He turned around and attacked me for the second time. I was impatiently waiting for him. Seeing this, I was overjoyed. I pretended to wave the Xianyuan sword in my hand twice, and immediately took the initiative to welcome his palms on my chest. This time, I didn't pretend to be as relaxed as before. Instead, I pretended to be ready to fight. No matter what, Grandpa Yuan had his own intelligence. If he saw my relaxed face, he would probably turn around and run away in a few moments. After his palms hit me for the second time, I deliberately retreated and pretended to be hurt. However, I felt so comfortable that I wanted to scream. After absorbing a huge amount of shaman energy into my body, it quickly changed. In just a blink of an eye, it had gathered in my heaven's veins. My cultivation base had advanced again. When the snake spirit and Tong Tong saw my appearance, they became anxious. They rushed over to check on me. I secretly used telepathy to ask the two of them to return to my body. They didn't need to fight anymore. Although the two of them were puzzled, they couldn't ask anything. They quickly followed my order. When Old Man Yuan saw my appearance, he immediately followed up with another attack. Just like that, I pretended to be hurt to lure him to attack me. In the blink of an eye, Old Man Yuan had attacked me dozens of times. Every attack was aimed at my chest. I wasn't too familiar with the sky-devouring art. When Old Man Yuan attacked me quickly, I managed to swallow all of the shaman energy. However, I also spat out a few mouthfuls of blood. I didn't do it on purpose. I was really hurt. Of course, Old Man Yuan was in a worse state than me. When he finally stopped, the huge amount of shaman energy on his body had shrunk by half. He stood there and looked at me in fear. It was as if he was looking at a strange beast. I was silent for a while. After I had digested all of the shaman energy, my injuries were instantly healed. I couldn't help but puff out my chest. My aura also increased. Seeing that, Old Man Yuan's eyes were filled with fear. He turned around and ran. His figure instantly disappeared into the darkness. Of course, I didn't chase after him. I had come here to save Fong Min. Now that Old Man Yuan had run away, Fong Min could be considered to have been saved. I turned around and flew back to Fong Min's soul. After confirming that she wasn't hurt, I reached out to grab her and left the dream. After coming out, I returned Fong Min's soul to her body. However, her soul was injured, so she wouldn't wake up for a while. After confirming that Fong Min was alright, I closed my eyes and checked my body. The shaman energy I had absorbed this time was now settling in the vein of the heavens. After a quick check, I was shocked. The amount of shaman energy I had absorbed this time was almost the same as the one I had absorbed from the Heavenly Law Corps servant in the Corps Een sect. Chapter 804. Although I was excited, I wasn't in a hurry to refine the shaman energy. The most important matter at hand was to deal with Grandpa Yuan. Even though I had already forced him to retreat, I couldn't let this matter drag on. Thus, I stood up and asked Monk Mingju to take care of Fong Min while I turned and walked towards the black vat. After going through so much, Monk Mingju naturally listened to me and immediately nodded in acknowledgement. I leaped up and quickly arrived in front of the black vat. Even though Grandpa Yuan had escaped from the previous battle, he had suffered a great loss. It was a good opportunity to kill him. As I pondered, I drew the armor-removing sword and circulated the shaman energy in my body. Using the 9 stars Heavenly Dipper, I slashed at the vat. Old Master Yuan had yet to complete his transformation. As long as he destroyed the huge vat, the formation before him would dissipate, and Old Master Yuan would be able to break through it without even having to attack. Just as everything was about to end, something unexpected happened. A figure suddenly appeared in front of the vat. With a sweep of his hand, the armor-removing sword chi was dispersed. I originally thought that it was Grandpa Yuan who was putting up a desperate struggle, but when I lifted my head and retracted the sword chi, I saw that it was Nangong. Originally, I had only guessed it. Now that he had appeared, it was confirmed. After blocking the armor-removing sword chi, Nangong didn't look at me but turned to check the vat behind him. Then, He frowned and looked at me. After a long while, he said, "Do you really want to do this?" He was very direct, so I didn't waste any more words. I nodded and asked, "Do you have a conscience to use such a vicious method?" Nangong's expression didn't change. He shook his head and said, "To achieve great things, you naturally have to pay a price. If you can't bear to do it, I'll do it for you." Even though I had already expected it, I couldn't help but feel embarrassed when I heard him say that. I couldn't help but say, "You say that you're helping me, but have you ever considered my feelings? What's the difference between you and a man-eating demon? Are human lives as worthless as grass in your eyes?" I really couldn't bear it. For a long time, many people, including Nangong, had been surrounding me. They wouldn't tell me what they were doing, but they kept saying that they were doing it for me. I could still tolerate other things, but the demonic methods in front of me were really hard to accept. Hearing my question, Nangong's complexion was still as calm as before. He nodded and said, "It's because of your feelings that I did this. In the end, your strength is still too weak. If you want to fight against it, it is too difficult. Furthermore, we don't have enough time. We need to take some measures." With that, he raised his head to look at the sky. His brows were tightly furrowed, and there was an indescribable worry on his face. I sighed and calmed myself down. I walked in front of him and said softly, "I know that you are worried, but whether these things will succeed or not is up to my fate. In the end, I still have to rely on myself to walk this path step by step." After I said that, Nangong stared at me intently. After a long while, he suddenly smiled. "You're right. You naturally have to walk your own path." Originally, there was anger hidden in his expression, as well as some resentment that iron did not meet his expectations. But at this moment it was completely different. After he finished speaking, he laughed twice and stepped aside. I didn't know why his attitude had changed, but his action of getting out of the way meant that he had chosen to compromise. Thus, I didn't hesitate anymore and flew toward the big black vat. The dismantling armor sword slashed down, and the big black vat vanished in just a blink of an eye. As for Old Man Yuan's corpse, it turned into dust with a loud bang, completely dissipating from the world. Since the skeleton was damaged, the Tai Chi diagram lost its effect and stopped working. The true dragon energy on the Tai Chi diagram sank into the ground at a speed visible to the naked eye, leaving only a mass of dark Yin energy floating in the air. That mass of Yin energy contained the souls of the previous 4 victims. They had lost their innocent lives because of me. With that thought, I felt a little guilty. After pondering for a while, I waved my hand and collected all the Yin energy into Xiang Lu's bag. I planned to give it to Monk Mingju, who would then send them to the 9 Serenities Samsara. At this moment, Nangong hadn't left yet. He stood at his spot and watched me destroy everything he had prepared. However, he still wore a smile on his face. I still had a lot of questions about this matter. After dealing with some of them, I went to him and asked him about them one by one. Nangong seemed to be in a good mood. He didn't conceal anything and told me everything. According to him, when the Heavenly Path's corpse of the corpse Yin sect died, he recognized that the amount of shaman energy was extremely low. If he wanted to succeed, he had to find another way. As for old Master Yuan, he had been following me in secret for the past few years. That was how he knew about it. Later, when he wanted to make the Tai Sui, he remembered this matter. He decided to use an ancient technique of the witch clan that had been lost for a long time to do an experiment on Grandpa Yuan's corpse. When Wen Tianxiang made the true dragon's vein, he had to put in a lot of effort. If Nangong wanted to make the Tai Sui, it wouldn't be easy. Although he had the ancient technique, he didn't have much confidence. He could only do his best and leave the rest to the heavens. He had to follow the records in the ancient books. First, he found a wisp of true dragon chi and a Buddha Sarira. Then, he went to Grandpa Yuan's tomb. Although the ancient technique required Yin energy to neutralize the true dragon chi, the amount of yin energy in Grandpa Yuan's corpse was too small. It couldn't resist the true dragon qi, which was the yang energy. With Nangong's ability, he could remove the yin energy in the corpse with just a wave of his hand. However, during this process the corpse would be damaged. Moreover, he had to be extra careful with every step he took. He couldn't be hasty. Thus, he had to arrange a yin scattering formation outside the tomb to disperse the yin energy in the corpse. By the time the yin qi had almost completely dissipated, a year had already passed. During this time, Nangong didn't stay idle. Aside from taking time to check the tomb, he also searched for 4 people with a single element. A year later, he had found the 4 people, but he was still missing another person with an extreme yin element. Later on, when Fang Min came to pay her respects to old Master Yuan, Nangong bumped into her. She had searched far and wide, only to find what she was looking for without much effort. She had finally put together the last piece of the puzzle. According to the time he had mentioned, it was possible that Fang Min had felt uneasy after receiving my warning. She had come to pay her respects to Grandpa Yuan, which was why she had met her end. In other words, my kind reminder almost caused Fang Min to die. After everything was ready, Nangong began the final arrangement. He didn't ask Grandpa Yuan to take Fang Min's life, because a person with a yin element would have some yang energy in her body when she was alive. That would make her soul impure. Therefore, he had asked Grandpa Yuan to appear in Fang Min's dream every day to force her to die. During this process, the yang energy in her body would be forced out. When the yin year, the yin month, and the yin day came, he would force her to commit suicide. People who committed suicide had strong resentment. Coupled with her extreme yin element, her 3 souls wouldn't scatter after her death. She wouldn't fall to the 9 serenities, and her resentment would overflow. That was how she got the extreme yin soul. It was the last and most important part. At this point, I finally understood why Grandpa Yuan had harassed Fang Min for half a month but hadn't taken her life yet. It was because of this reason. I knew what happened next, so Nangong didn't say anything. After listening to everything he had to say, I remained silent. Although I did not participate in this matter, everything happened because of me. Regarding this, I really feel guilty. Seeing that I didn't say anything, Nangong smiled wryly. He looked at me and said, "Do you know that after tomorrow, the living Tai Sui will be complete? You can swallow it to replenish your witchcraft energy. When you advance to the completion realm, you can turn the Tai Sui into your Yang spirit and advance to the Yang God Celestial Master." The Celestial Master of the Wu tribe had told me about the Tai Sui as his Yang spirit in the imperial tomb of the Shang dynasty. Although witchcraft energy and Tao energy could be converted, they couldn't replace each other. It wasn't difficult for people who cultivated Tao energy to advance to the Yang God Celestial Master level. They just needed to reach the completion realm, understand the heavenly Tao, and refine a Yang spirit. However, people who cultivated witchcraft energy were different. Even if they reached the completion realm, they had to swallow a living Tai Sui and turn it into their Yang spirit. It was for this reason that, although the Wu tribe led by Shennong was the most powerful force in the world, it eventually weakened. In the end, Xianyuan, who cultivated Tao energy, became the orthodox clan, while the Wu tribe hid in the mountain and sea realm and didn't care about worldly affairs. Later, the mountain and sea realm changed. Shennong sealed the mountain and sea realm, and the Wu tribe was almost extinct. At the same time, because of the battle between Monster Emperor Mu and Emperor Ku, blood sacrifices became popular in the Shang dynasty. Almost all the remaining Tai Sui were turned into true dragon veins. Since then, witchcraft energy was on the verge of extinction. Back to me, because of my special identity, Nangong was far more concerned about improving my cultivation than I was. That was why he had secretly arranged everything. I could understand his bitter smile, and I could even understand everything that he had secretly planned. However, the problem was that using such a method to harm innocent people to create the Tai Sui, even if I succeeded in becoming a Yang God Celestial Master, it was not in line with my Tao. Therefore, even if I was tempted by the Yang God Celestial Master, I refused without the slightest hesitation. Of course, the reason I refused was not only because it was against morality, but also because I could go to the Grand Palace in Thailand and find the Tai Sui there to break through to the Yang God level. Nangong had killed so many innocent people. In my opinion, there was no need for him to do so. I told Nangong what I was thinking, but after he heard it, he shook his head and told me that he didn't know why the Tai Sui was wandering in the outer realm, but before he could confirm it, he couldn't determine the existence of the Tai Sui. Therefore, the Tai Sui was not in his consideration. What he said was reasonable, but in my opinion, when the black-robed Asian Ality talked about the power of the 9 spirits, it wasn't without reason. There was a reason for everything. Even if the Tai Sui didn't exist there was no such thing as a dead end in this world. Eventually we could find the Tai Sui somewhere else. Just like Shao Jin and the corpse of the heavenly law in the Corp sect. The world was too big. Even after thousands of years of vicissitudes, there were still people or things that the world didn't know existed in some corners. Like me, Nangong, and the sacrificial evil spirit. After listening to me, Nangong sighed and waved his hand. He didn't mention this matter anymore. Perhaps it was because I had mentioned the evil spirit's sacrifice. Nangong told me with a sigh, including the evil spirit's sacrifice, there are only 5 people of the shaman tribe left, which is less than the number of fingers on one hand. When he mentioned the witch tribe, my interest was piqued. Nangong had never told me his identity. Now, I could finally confirm that he was a descendant of the witch tribe. Wang Can's 9 Cauldrons family was also a member of the witch tribe. However, the Fat Father and his son were different. They could only be regarded as people who cultivated witchcraft energy, but they weren't part of the witch tribe. Wang Can, his son, and Nangong, I knew that there were only 3 members of the witch tribe. As for the other 2, I didn't know about them. After asking Nangong, he smiled and told me, Chi Yu is also a member of the witch tribe. After listening to him, I was bewildered. Then I got it. According to the historical records, Chi Yu was a subordinate of the Yen Emperor. So, it wasn't wrong to say that he belonged to the witch tribe. However, the sacrificial evil spirit said that he was a general under the command of Monster Emperor Jun. When I asked Nangong, he waved his hand and didn't want to talk about it. Chi Yu is a member of the witch tribe, and he's just a follower of Monster Emperor Jun. Since he didn't want to talk about it, I didn't ask further. Counting the sacrificial evil spirit, there were only 4 people. Who's the last one? Nangong smiled mysteriously. I know him, too. He has a high position and has a special relationship with me. However, he can't tell me. Chapter 805. Nangong had always been elusive, so I didn't mind his sudden disappearance. What caught my attention was the last person that he had mentioned. Based on our interactions in the past, even though Nangong also hid some things from me, he was extremely principled. He would tell me things that he didn't want me to ask, but he wouldn't mention things that he couldn't say. He rarely acted like he did today, purposely keeping me in suspense. After thinking for a while, I couldn't figure out who the last person of the witch tribe was. But it didn't seem to be related to me, so I shook my head and put it aside. I collected my thoughts and returned to the foot of the mountain. Fang Min had woken up, but her mental state wasn't very good. Grandpa Yuan had pulled out a wisp of her soul, and it seemed that she wouldn't be able to recover in a short time. When Monk Mingzhu saw me, he hurriedly led the other monks to bow to me and said, "Benefactor, you will be rewarded for your great kindness." He was smart and didn't ask for the result. He just congratulated me. I nodded slightly and didn't stand on ceremony. From the bottom of my heart, what I had done was indeed a good deed. I couldn't do the cruel act of cutting one's own flesh to feed an eagle, but I would try my best not to harm others while benefiting myself. This should be a person's basic concept of good and evil, and I would abide by it. I took out the souls of the previous people and handed them to Mingjue. I told him, "These are the souls of those 4 people. They died in vain, and their souls can't enter the cycle of reincarnation. I would like to ask the Master to perform a ritual to help them ascend. The Master's Buddhist teachings are profound, and he can certainly eliminate their resentment and send them to the 9 nether samsara." Mingjue looked ashamed when he heard me say that. He repeatedly praised me and then collected the souls. He said that these people's fate was special, and they needed to be sent back to the temple to ascend. I originally wanted to do it myself, but generally speaking, the Buddhists were good at this, so it would be better if Mingjue did it. On the other hand, after I had absorbed the witchcraft energy, I was gradually absorbing it along with the circulatory cycle revolution in my body, and there were signs of a breakthrough. I had to settle down as soon as possible and sort out the aura in my body. After that, Mingjue chatted with me for a while and left his contact information. Then, he left with the monk. I helped Fong Min to the car. After sending her home, I found a hotel to stay in. He sat cross-legged on the bed in the hotel room and began to sort out the shaman chi in his heavenly meridian. In the blink of an eye, several hours had passed in this meditation. I had finally finished sorting out the shaman energy in my body, and my cultivation had also taken the opportunity to break through to the late stage of the seal realm in one go. After the breakthrough, I wanted to settle down and stabilize my foundation, but the power in my body was still surging. The power I had absorbed from Grandpa Yuan hadn't been used up yet. The last time I made a rash breakthrough and almost became a demon was still vivid in my mind. However, the situation this time was different. During this period of time, I had spent a lot of time consolidating my foundation. My cultivation had already reached the peak of the middle stage of the seal realm, but I had been suppressing it for a long time. My foundation had already been firmly established. After breaking through to the late stage of the seal realm, the flow of energy in my heavenly veins didn't show any signs of sluggishness. Obviously, I didn't have to worry about becoming a demon again. Thus, after pondering for a while, I clenched my teeth and continued to sort out the shaman energy in my body, trying to break through the seal. Because I had enough shaman energy in my body, and there was no barrier in the seal realm, I exhaled a long breath after a few hours. My cultivation had officially reached the peak of the seal realm, and I was only one step away from the Yang God realm. No wonder Nangong was confident that he could use Grandpa Yuan to create the Tai Sui so that I could directly advance to the Yang God realm. The shaman energy in Grandpa Yuan's body was too strong. Just the part one had absorbed was enough to support me to break through to the peak of the seal realm. Next, after devouring the Tai Sui, it was only a matter of time before I could advance to the Yang God realm. But now, without Grandpa Yuan, I had to find another way to successfully advance to the Yang God realm. In fact, I didn't have much choice. At present, the only information I knew was the power of the 9 spirits that Aizen had mentioned. It seemed that I needed to go abroad. In the past few days, many things had happened around me. The Xianyuan sword, the Nuwa stone, the Fushi zither, the Eastern Emperor bell, and other ancient divine weapons had appeared one after another. Some of the things in the ancient myths and legends also had a lot to do with me. Although I still couldn't figure out what it all meant, I had a vague sense of crisis. I always felt that something was about to happen. Thus, my desire for cultivation was very strong. Moreover, I had just met Bien, so I was eager to improve my cultivation and reunite with him as soon as possible. After thinking about it for a while, I decided not to slack off any longer. I immediately left for Thailand. After making up my mind, I didn't leave immediately. Instead, I went to Fong Min's house to make sure that she was safe and sound. Then, I gave her a heart-calming talisman before leaving Min Province and returning to Shenzhen. Going abroad wasn't like moving around in China, where I could take action at any time. I had to go through some procedures like passports and visas first. If I went there myself, I didn't know how much time it would take. Of course, it was best to leave this matter to Wang Yongjun. It was true. I didn't know what methods he had used, but the next day, the passports and visas were all ready and sent to my room. I had used these 2 days to stabilize my cultivation base. At this moment, I was even more eager to enter the Yang spirit realm. I didn't want to waste any more time. I followed the driver Wang Yongjun had sent me to the airport. When we arrived at the airport, I wanted to book the next flight. Unexpectedly, Wang Yongjun had booked a small commercial plane and was on standby. The driver took me to the tarmac. After boarding the plane, we waited for 1 hour to confirm the flight route. Then, we departed for Thailand. A few hours later, the plane landed at Bangkok Airport. I didn't ask the driver Wang Yongjun had sent to accompany me. I left the airport and went to the downtown area of Bangkok. It was late at night. I didn't hurry to go to the king's palace. Instead, I found a hotel to stay. There were many Chinese tourists in Bangkok. That was why the receptionists in these hotels could speak Chinese, which saved me a lot of trouble. After washing my face and brushing my teeth, I started to think about what I wanted to do next. That black-cloved Azan had told me that I had the power of the 9 spirits, and that I could study it now. He meant that I could go and see the Tai Sui. At that time, it would be the best time to take action. However, I had learned about swallowing the Tai Sui from Nangong, so I didn't know how to do it. This time, I was a little anxious. Let alone the other things, just the Tai Sui's huge body was enough to make my scalp go numb. The entire night was spent in trepidation. The next morning, when it was just after 7 a.m., I got up from my bed. After a good night's rest, I was full of energy. I planned to go to the king's palace immediately. However, when I got out of the hotel, the street was crowded with people. I didn't have a place to rest. I was skeptical. Did something bad happen here? When I got closer, I saw that the people on the street were standing on both sides of the road, leaving an empty space in the middle. Each of them was holding something in their hand. Some were clothes while others were food. The crowd wasn't noisy. They were all looking at the west side of the street as if they were waiting for someone. I had never seen such a scene before. It piqued my curiosity. However, I wasn't in a hurry. I decided to stay here and see what was going on. Around 5 or 6 minutes later, people finally appeared on the west side of the street. They were all wearing Thai monk robes. Several people were walking in the front, carrying a solemn Buddha statue on their shoulders. The monks behind them were holding alms bowls. Every time they took a step, someone would throw clothes or food into their alms bowls. After that, the passers-by kneeled in front of the Buddha statue. They looked very pious. At this moment, I understood that today was an important Buddhist festival in Thailand. After a brief calculation, I confirmed that today was the summer festival. Before coming here, I had learned about Thai Buddhism. The summer festival was one of the most important Buddhist festivals in Thailand. It was held every year on the 15th day of the 11th month of the Thai calendar. It was also called the Summer Festival, the Passover Festival, or the Juju Festival. At this time, the 3-month summer festival was over, and the monks could go out as usual. On this day, the common people were holding a grand meal in the temple and listening to the monks recite Buddhist scriptures. The people moved the Buddha statue out of the temple and placed it in a small pavilion that could be moved. The alms bowls were placed on the Buddha statue, and the monks followed the Buddha statue with the alms bowls in their hands. Believers sat in a line and placed the alms bowls into the alms bowls. The alms bowls were mainly rice, vegetables, glutinous rice dumplings with pink bananas, and coconut rice dumplings with yada leaves. When people held a meal in Bangkok's Jinshan Temple, they moved the Buddha statue from the temple to the foot of the mountain. In addition, during the summer festival, people also performed activities such as donating Buddhist robes, summer festival garments, and releasing yellow cloth. Since these monks had moved the Buddha statue out of the temple, they must be monks from Jinshan Temple. I didn't want to watch anymore. I decided to walk through the crowd and head toward the king's palace. However, before I could take a step, the monks lifted the Buddha statue and stopped in front of me. At this moment, the people around me were kneeling in front of the Buddha statue. I was the only one standing. In Thailand, Buddhism had a much higher status than in our country. Whether it was a monk or a common person, they had to kneel when they saw the Buddha statue. However, I wasn't a monk, and I wasn't a Thai citizen either. Kneeling was a little too much for me. The monk walking in front of me was enraged when he saw me like that. He walked forward to talk to me. However, I didn't understand what he was talking about, so I just stood there and didn't move. The monk became even angrier. It seemed he thought that I was looking down on their Buddha. He raised his hand and placed it on my shoulder, trying to force me to kneel. I didn't want to fight with such an ordinary person, but his behavior showed that he didn't know what was good for him. I gathered my Taoist energy in my palm and gently pushed it away. The monk was sent flying in just a blink of an eye. When the people kneeling in front of me saw that I had easily sent the monk flying, they screamed and looked at me. Many of them were fanatics of Buddhism, and their eyes turned hostile. At the same time, a group of monks walked toward me from a distance. It seemed they wanted to punish me. With my cultivation base, I didn't care about these people. However, since I was in a foreign land, I didn't want to cause trouble. I leaped into the air, avoiding the pedestrians on the ground. Then, I turned into a jet of light and flew far away. Chapter 806. When Ality told me about the Grand Palace, I thought it was just a temple. But before I came here, I did some research and found out that the Grand Palace is not just a temple. In fact, the Grand Palace could be said to be the most important building in Thailand, as well as the most famous attraction. It was also the landmark of Bangkok. Also known as the Grand Palace, it used to be the palace of the Siamese royal family. It contained the essence of Thai architecture, painting, sculpture, and decoration. It was known as the Thailand Art Collection. In the early 20th century, King Rama VIII was assassinated in the Grand Palace, and his successor, King Rama IX, moved to the newly built Jarata Palace to the east of the Grand Palace. After that, the Grand Palace was opened to the public for coronation ceremonies, palace celebrations, and so on. It became a famous tourist attraction in Thailand. There were 4 magnificent buildings in the King's Palace, namely the Chaste Foundation Palace, the Law Palace, the Amaran Palace, and the Jade Buddha Temple. The Jade Buddha Temple was the place where the royal family held religious ceremonies. It was the most important temple in Bangkok and the most sacred place in Thai Buddhism. Ality and his disciple are obviously in this Jade Buddha Temple. My goal for this trip is also here. The car had already stopped in front of the King's Palace. Since it was a scenic area, the car couldn't go in directly, so I got off the car and walked inside. It was an important festival for Thai Buddhism, so most of the people in the palace were tourists. Basically, there were no locals. According to a Chinese peddler, most of the locals went to the Jade Buddha Temple to listen to Zen. Although the buildings of the Grand King's Palace were very grand, I didn't come here for sightseeing. I didn't want to stay here any longer, so I headed straight for the Jade Buddha Temple. The Jade Buddha Temple was located in the northeast corner of the Grand Palace. At this time, many tourists were rushing there. Perhaps they knew that today was an important Thai Buddhist festival and wanted to join in the fun, so it was not difficult to find them. When I arrived, the entrance of the Jade Buddha Temple was crowded with tourists. This place was the main hall of the Jade Buddha Temple. Of course, the scripture preaching ceremony would be held here. However, there were soldiers in front of us to maintain order, so ordinary people couldn't enter. I could only watch from afar. A white-haired old man was sitting in front of the huge jade Buddha statue. The old man wore a golden robe with some strange patterns embroidered on it. Sitting on both sides of him were a group of Thai monks in red robes. At first glance, I found one of them familiar. After a closer look, I recognized him. He was the black-clothed Asen Arati. I clearly remembered that Alati had once told me that his master was Sidragupta of the Jade Buddha Temple of the King's Palace. In Thailand, only eminent monks between 30 and 60 years old could be called Venerable Father. Venerable Father had a high status in Thai Buddhism. What's more, Alati's master was the Venerable Father of the most prestigious temple in Thailand. His status was self-evident. If Sirambhava T. Sirambhava was Sirambhava, then his master, Sirambhava, as his that he was a disciple of King. The old man sitting in front of the Buddha statue was able to make Alati preach to him. It seemed that his identity was not ordinary. In addition, from the way he was dressed, he should be a member of the royal family. I had that Sias that was to be he. I of Sias, he that palace. I had the three-faced bronze Buddha statue that Alati had given me as a keepsake. Normally, I could enter the Jade Buddha temple. However, the situation today was special. With so many people here, I couldn't get a seat. Left with no choice, I had to wait until the end of the Buddhist scripture lecture. The Buddhist scripture lecture wouldn't end in a short time. Since it was still early, I decided to walk around the Grand Palace instead of standing there like a fool. The scenery here was unique, and it had an exotic charm to it. It was not an undeserved reputation for being so famous. I turned around and prepared to leave. However, after a few minutes, a large group of people gathered behind me. They were all ordinary tourists, so I couldn't use my Taoist technique to push them away. I had to force my way through. It took me a long time to get out of the crowd. After coming out, I conveniently bought a Chinese version of the tourist guide from a roadside stall. Following the instructions on it, I walked around the king's palace while reading. The Grand Palace was huge. It was more than 200,000 square meters. Except for the forbidden areas of the palace, which weren't open to the public, the rest of the palace was open to the public. Before I knew it, I had reached a place that looked like a Western building. It wasn't as crowded as the previous one. I glanced at the guide in my hand. This place was called Wulong Baiman Palace. It was the only Western-style building in the Grand Palace. There weren't many tourists here. Perhaps it was because this building looked special in the Grand Palace, but in the eyes of the tourists, it wasn't as unique as the other buildings. However, this place belonged to the inner court and wasn't open to the public. I had to walk around it a few times. After finding nothing strange, I decided to move on to the next attraction. However, after taking a few steps, I found some people following me. They weren't ordinary tourists. They all had the aura of Buddhism. Moreover, they looked familiar. They were the monks I had fought with on the street. Earlier, I didn't want to pay attention to those low-level monks on the street and flew away. Who would have thought that they could follow me? It was interesting. However, they weren't in a hurry to take action. Perhaps it was because this place was an important place for the royal family, and it wasn't convenient for them to attack. I didn't take the initiative to attack them. There was a thick forest in front of me. I had to lure them there first before taking action. I quickened my pace, and those people followed me. When I reached the depths of the forest, I stopped. The group of monks behind me seemed to have realized that I had discovered them. They didn't show any mercy and dashed toward me. I didn't hurry to attack them. I turned around and observed them. These 5 or 6 people only had Sure Yao cultivation base. I didn't know what they were relying on to chase after me. I stood still and waited until they came close. Then, I used the Heavenly Master's word and shouted, "Kneel." In an instant, those people stopped moving and knelt down in front of me. Their faces were frightened, but they quickly changed their expressions. Their eyes were filled with murderous aura. It seemed there was a big difference between Thai Buddhism and the Buddhism in our country. I had only seen such ferocious eyes on monk Miaojue. If they were experts in Buddhism, they wouldn't have such murderous thoughts. Although they were rude to me, I didn't want to hurt them. It was my first time here, so it wasn't wise to make an enemy of Thai Buddhism. I walked in front of them. I didn't care if they understood me or not, but I warned them not to seek trouble for themselves in the future. The leader of the group was a little stronger. His cultivation base was at the peak of Shiryao. After listening to me, he was bewildered. Then, he asked me in broken Chinese, "What's your purpose in coming here?" I didn't care about him. I walked around them and headed back. Unexpectedly, I hadn't gone far when I heard Buddhist chants coming from a distance. According to this person's aura, he was at the middle stage of the sealing Heavenly Master realm. Previously, I had my suspicions. How could a few Shiryao monks do anything to me? It turned out they had sent a sealing Heavenly Master on a mission. However, this level of strength wasn't enough to stop me. I didn't care who was behind me and continued to walk forward. That monk seemed to be annoyed by my behavior. He flew toward me in the blink of an eye. I stopped in my tracks and started to size him up. He looked like a middle-aged man with the cultivation base of a sealing Heavenly Master. I guessed he had a high position in the temple. Perhaps he was also a venerable father. It seemed Jinshan Temple was really calculative. I had just injured one of their monks, but they had sent a venerable father to capture me. Seeing that I didn't speak, he asked, "You're a cultivator from China. Why did you come to Thailand? What are you trying to do?" As soon as this person arrived, he used an interrogative tone, which made me quite displeased. I didn't answer him. I just shook my head and walked past him. When the monk saw that I didn't pay attention to him, he became even angrier. I didn't care about his feelings. With my current strength, dealing with him was as easy as flipping my hand. After walking for around 10 meters, I suddenly felt an evil energy coming from behind me. It was a familiar feeling. It was similar to the move Zan had used in the exchange competition in Shenzhen. It seemed the monks of Jinshan Temple didn't practice orthodox Buddhism. Instead, they used these evil and sinister moves as a facade. I had suffered a lot from Western mysterious techniques, and it wasn't a good feeling. Moreover, although this man's cultivation base wasn't as high as mine, he was still a sealing Heavenly Master. Moreover, he had used such a sinister move. I couldn't be careless. With that thought in mind, I immediately turned around and mobilized the Tao energy in my body to cover my body. The evil energy dashed toward me and hit my chest in the blink of an eye. Although this kind of evil technique was tricky, the monk's strength was much lower than mine. Moreover, he didn't have the ability to cross realms to injure people like me. The evil energy dissipated in a flash. I wasn't hurt at all. The monk didn't look surprised when he saw that his technique had no effect on me. His face looked serious as he took out a thumb-sized black amulet from his chest. I had seen this thing before, and the three-armed Buddha statue on it looked very familiar. It was almost the same as the amulet Zan had used in the past. Zan had used this amulet to stump me. Now that I saw it again, I couldn't help but take it seriously. The monk took off the amulet and placed it on his hands. He closed his eyes and mumbled something. As he chanted louder and louder, the amulet actually began to change. While I wasn't paying attention, the thumb-sized amulet had grown to the size of a palm. Chapter 807. I was already at the Seal Celestial Master completion realm. Although I didn't dare to be arrogant and think that I could kill him, I could definitely escape unscathed. As such, I wasn't in a hurry to attack. I was curious about this evil technique and wanted to see what this monk was capable of. While I was thinking, the amulet had already become as tall as a person. The monk didn't hold it in his hand anymore, but stood it on the ground. However, he didn't stop chanting. I didn't know how big he wanted the Buddha to become before he stopped. As I was thinking about this, the monk suddenly opened his eyes and said to me in broken Chinese, "You really don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. You actually dare to stand here and wait for your death." My expression didn't change. I ignored his provocation and looked at the Buddha that was as tall as a person. I had a feeling that this Buddha wasn't as simple as just growing bigger. Indeed, when the monk saw that I didn't respond, he closed his eyes and continued chanting. The Buddha didn't grow bigger, but its body gradually emitted black smoke. The rolling smoke gradually formed the appearance of Shakyamuni. The Buddha, made of smoke, under the monk's control, swung its palm at me. The palm was extremely fast. Even with my current Seal Celestial Master Completion Realm cultivation, I couldn't immediately block it, so I could only dodge. In the blink of an eye, a loud sound came from where I was standing, and a lot of smoke and dust rose. After the dust settled, there was a 5-finger-deep pit that was several meters deep. I was shocked. I didn't expect a phantom to have such power. It seemed to be comparable to the Yang God Celestial Master's Yang God. I didn't dare to be careless. Immediately, I mobilized the Tao energy in my body to the armor-removing sword. I stepped on the 9-star heavenly dipper and slashed at Shakyamuni. The phantom seemed to come to life. When it saw my sword energy, it met it with another palm. Unfortunately, it still underestimated my strength. Even an ordinary Yang God Celestial Master wouldn't dare to take my sword head-on, let alone a mere phantom. When the huge palm met the armor-removing sword energy, it immediately dissipated. However, the armor-removing sword energy didn't weaken in the slightest. Wherever the armor-removal sword chi passed through, the thick black fog would dissipate. When the statue of the Sakyamuni Buddha dissipated, the monk's body trembled and he coughed up a mouthful of blood. His face turned deathly pale. The Buddha statue, which was as tall as a person, returned to its original form and landed on the ground with a crisp sound. I withdrew my stance and walked toward the monk. In a low voice, I said, "I didn't want to fight with you, but you've stirred up trouble. Don't blame me for not showing mercy to your Jinshan temple." As he spoke, the armor-stripping sword in his hand was already in front of his neck. The monk seemed to realize that he couldn't escape death today. He didn't make any noise and simply closed his eyes, waiting for my sword to fall. Just as I was about to take action, a familiar voice sounded from behind me. "Lord, please spare his life." This person was Arati. Perhaps he had sensed the fight earlier and wanted to see what was going on. However, since the monk had been rude to me, I could have just killed him. I didn't know why Arati was begging for mercy. However, since the monk didn't have the strength to fight back, I wasn't in a hurry. I wanted to hear what Arati had to say. I put away the armor-remover sword and turned to look at Alati. He quickly walked toward me and bowed to greet me. He didn't waste any time and directly told me that the monk was called Dragon Popo Kue and that he was a monk of Jinshan Temple. If I kill this person, it will definitely attract the revenge of Jinshan Temple. I had already expected this. This person had the cultivation base of a heavenly seal master. According to Thai Buddhism's ranking system, he deserved the title of Dragon Popo. However, the Dragon Popo of Jinshan Temple couldn't do anything to me. Who else could fight me? Arati saw that my expression didn't change. Perhaps he knew what I was thinking. He moved closer to me and whispered, "This Jinshan Temple has a Dragon Popo, and I heard that there's a Zhao Kun." Although I didn't know what these terms meant, from Alati's expression, I could guess that Long Pu and Zhao Kun were stronger than Venerable Father Dragon. Venerable Father had a high status in Thai Buddhism. If he was killed, it would alert Long Pu and Zhao Kun, whom Arati mentioned. At that time, it would indeed be a little troublesome. It would have been fine if he didn't know about it earlier, but now that he knew about it, he felt a little apprehensive. However, this is nothing to me. Even if I kill all these monks, I can't guarantee that this matter won't be leaked. However, since Alati knows me, the Jade Buddha Temple might be dragged into this mess. At that time, there will be a huge commotion, and the consequences will be unimaginable. However, if I don't kill them, the people of Jinshan Temple will definitely find trouble with me again. At that time, a battle will be inevitable. However, on second thought, if he spared their lives, they wouldn't end up in a situation where they had to fight to the death. With a decision in my heart, I no longer hesitated. He put the armor-removing sword back into the Xiang Lu pouch and signaled Alati to leave this place quickly. Alati didn't dare to be negligent. He nodded repeatedly and followed me out of the forest, heading toward the Jade Buddha Temple. Wulong's Baiman Palace wasn't far from the Jade Buddha Temple. Along the way, Alati kept apologizing to me, saying that he didn't know that I was in Thailand. Moreover, the king had been listening to a Zen sermon in the Jade Buddha Temple. That was why he didn't treat me well. The king that Alati mentioned must be the old man who was sitting quietly in the Jade Buddha Hall. I had already expected this, so I didn't mind it. Although he called me the Son of God, I couldn't compare to the King of Thailand. I knew what was more important. I waved my hand, indicating that he didn't need to worry about it. I just wanted to come to Thailand, but I didn't contact them beforehand. I even attacked the Buddhist monks in the king's palace. I was a little rash. When Alati heard me, he stopped and bowed to me. Sir, please don't misunderstand. Our Jade Buddha Temple and Jinshan Temple don't have a good relationship. Not only do we have a good relationship, but we've also been enemies for many years. I've already sensed the situation in his words when I was in the dense forest. However, it was Thai Buddhism's business, so I couldn't ask or intervene. That was why I had agreed to spare those people's lives, because I wanted to give the Jade Buddha Temple face. I had come here to ask for something, and if I didn't act friendly, I was afraid it would be inconvenient. I didn't care about that, so I told him not to be so formal. After listening to me, Alati nodded and followed me. He didn't say anything else. I had some doubts that I wanted him to answer. He had mentioned that Jinshan Temple had Long Pu and even Zhao Kuan. I didn't know much about Thailand's division of realms. The only thing I knew about the Three Spirits realm was from him in Shenzhen. Alati didn't dare to hide anything from me. According to him, in Thai Buddhism, Long Pu was one level higher than Venerable Father Dragon, which was equivalent to the Yang God Celestial Master realm in China. Zhao Kuan's status was even higher than Long Pu's, and Zhou Guan was above him. Zhou Guan was the title given by the king. It was said that his cultivation base had reached the level of God. After listening to him, I had a general understanding of Thailand's division of realms. In other words, Venerable Father Dragon was a Seal Heavenly Master, Long Pu was a Yang God Celestial Master, and Zhao Kuan was a Yang God. From this, I knew that Zhou Guan had ascended to the Heavenly Realm. Ascending to the Heavenly Realm meant that he had reached the peak of cultivation. It was reasonable to describe him as a god. I then asked Alati if he knew how many Zhou Guan there were in Thailand. He told me that Zhou Guan was just a legend. Until now, there hadn't been any accurate records of him. At this moment, he only knew Zhao Kuan. I nodded. It made sense. Thailand's population and territory couldn't compare to China's. With such a large population, the probability of having someone with such a cultivation base wasn't high. Even if there was someone with such a high cultivation base, he would have ascended to the heavenly realm and wouldn't have stayed in the human world. That was why my question was meaningless. I was more interested in the Zhao Kuan he had mentioned. He had previously mentioned that there was a Zhao Kuan in the Golden Mountain Temple. Of course, I wasn't afraid of Long Pu of Jinshan Temple. When I was at the middle stage of the Seal Realm, I had the power to fight against Yang God's Celestial Master, let alone now that I was at the peak stage of the Seal Realm. However, Zhao Kuan was equivalent to the Ascending Realm. With my current cultivation base, the gap between us was too big. If those monks could invite Zhao Kun to deal with me, I wouldn't be able to deal with him alone since the evil sacrificial spirit wasn't with me. I hurried to ask Alati if it was true. After listening to me, Alati shook his head. He was a little hesitant as he said, "I'm not sure. I've only heard people talking about it." This vague answer made me a little worried. However, it was better to believe it than not. I had to be prepared. I was in a foreign country, and I didn't have anyone I could rely on. Speaking of friendship, I only knew Alati. However, if Jinshan Temple had the rumor about Zhao Kun, I guessed the Jade Buddha Temple also had the same rumor. No matter what, the Jade Buddha Temple's status was second to none in the entire Thai Buddhism world. In terms of power, they wouldn't lose to Jinshan Temple. With that in mind, I quickly asked Alati about it. After listening to me, he wore a sad expression, as though I had brought up something sad. After a moment of silence, he explained to me the reason behind it. According to him, the Jade Buddha Temple's status was second to none in the Thai Buddhism world. However, it was different from the other temples. Besides chanting Buddhist scriptures every day, they also needed to worship the power of the Nine Spirit. They hoped that they could get the approval of the power of the Nine Spirit. Only after they got the approval of the power of the Nine Spirits could they become the Holy Son and advance to the Venerable Father level. However, after they advanced to the Long Pu level, they had to worship the power of the Nine Spirit. Without the power of the Nine Spirits order, they couldn't go out on their own. Chapter 808. According to Arati, the most powerful person in the Jade Buddha Temple was probably his master, Shidragupta. No wonder he had used his master's name to invite me to Thailand. While we were talking, we arrived at the entrance of the Jade Buddha Temple. The scripture preaching ceremony was over, but many tourists were still lingering around. Alati could only lead me through the crowd and into the Jade Buddha Hall. The monks from earlier were still sitting in the temple. When they saw us, they stood up and clasped their palms together to greet Alati. Alati returned the greeting and took me through the Jade Buddha Temple. We arrived at a courtyard. The layout of the courtyard was similar to that of Chinese tradition. The flowers, shrubs, and rockery were arranged in a certain way. Geomancy was hidden everywhere. I couldn't help but look around. Alati saw my movements and smiled. All the courtyards in this Jade Buddha Temple were built by a Chinese geomancy master. Speaking of which, it has something to do with the Metaphysics Society that I belong to. I was bewildered. Then I got it. The last time I met him, I represented the Metaphysics Society. A few years had passed, and the situation had changed. However, I didn't want to talk about my personal matters, so I smiled and acquiesced. We continued to walk for around 5 or 6 minutes until we reached a door with red ribbons hanging from it. He finally stopped and gestured for me to calm down. Then, he walked forward and stood in front of the door. He bowed and shouted, "Master, the Holy Sun is here." It was interesting that when he talked to Shiva, he didn't use Thai but Chinese. Could it be that Shiva was Chinese? As I was thinking about this, I heard a reply from the other side of the door. Shiva gestured for us to enter. Alati pushed the door open and bowed, inviting me to enter. I didn't refuse. When we entered the room, I saw a monk in a red robe sitting on a lotus pedestal with his back to us. This scene surprised me. It wasn't because of Shiva's style. It was because he wasn't sitting on a Buddhist futon but on a lotus pedestal. As far as I knew, only monks like bodhisattvas could sit on a lotus pedestal. Even arhats in Buddhism couldn't sit on a lotus pedestal. Obviously, it was impossible for Sirambhava to be enlightened and become a Buddha. This was probably due to the difference in customs between the Buddhism of Thailand and the Buddhism of the Central Earth. At this moment, Alati walked forward and bowed respectfully to Shiramampa's back. He then said, "Master, the Holy Sun is here." Shiva didn't move at first. After a few seconds, he stood up and turned around. He didn't say anything, but his dim yellow eyes scanned me from head to toe. He looked to be in his 50s or 60s and looked hale and hearty. There was a string of Buddhist beads engraved with complicated Sanskrit on his chest. After glancing at the Sanskrit characters, I felt strange. Recently, I've had a lot of dealings with the Buddhist sects, so I've also studied the Buddhist sections. As far as I know, Thai Buddhism is Theravada Buddhism, also known as Southern Buddhism and Pali Buddhism. Of course, their scriptures were written in Pali, so why was Shiva's prayer beads written in Sanskrit? It was said that the Sanskrit language was created by the guardian deity of Buddhism, Brahma. Sanskrit was a language of the Indo-Aryan branch of the Indo-Iranian language family of the Indo-European language family. It was one of the oldest languages in the Indo-European language family. Although Thailand and India weren't far from each other, and it was understandable that Buddhism could influence each other, the scriptures they wrote were completely different. I recalled the scene I'd seen in the courtyard, the conversation between Alati and Shiva in Chinese, and the Sanskrit prayer bead. It was obvious that Shiva had a deep relationship with the Buddhism in this country. While I was thinking, Shiva finally spoke. He bowed to me respectfully and said, "Mister, please have a seat." His Chinese was perfect and fluent. It seemed to confirm my previous guess. The way he addressed me was also unique. He didn't call me holy son or benefactor, but he called me Mister. It was new to me. I nodded and stooped to check. There was only a futon in front of him. I sat down cross-legged. After I sat down, Shiva asked Alati to serve me tea. His gesture didn't look like an otherworldly Buddhist, but he had the etiquette of the secular world. I didn't mind. I took the tea from Alati and tasted it. Then, Shiva continued, "A few years ago, I heard from Alati that he met someone who was recognized by the power of the 9 spirits in Shenzhen, China. Today I can see that you're really extraordinary." His polite words were beautiful, so I didn't mind. I cupped my fists and smiled. That day, Alati and I agreed to visit your temple 1 year later. However, I was busy with secular affairs and missed the appointed time. I hope you won't blame me for taking the liberty to come here. He smiled and shook his head. I have the power of the 9 spirits, so you don't need to be so polite. I can come to the Jade Buddha temple at any time. Since Shiva was so understanding, I didn't stand on ceremony anymore. Then we chatted casually. Most of the time, we asked about the situation of the cultivators in this country. Of course, there was nothing to hide. Alati had been to China before, so he had a general understanding of the situation. I took the chance to ask him why he knew so much about China and the pedestal of the lotus flower. Shiva still wore a faint smile and answered my questions one by one. According to him, when he was still Asian, he had traveled all over China and had exchanges with many famous monks about the Dharma. During his travels, he came in contact with Chinese metaphysics. He was very interested in it. While exchanging Buddhist teachings with the local Buddhist monks, he studied Chinese metaphysics. Soon, he was fascinated. After that, he stayed in China for 10 years before returning to the Jade Buddha temple. Now that he was almost 70 years old, he often recalled some things that happened in the past. That was why he kept asking me about China. It was similar to my speculation. I nodded and didn't mind it. As for the pedestal, it was a tradition of the Jade Buddha temple. The golden lotus was the national flower of Thailand. It was often used in large-scale ceremonies and celebrations, such as building cities. When the army went to war, they would put the golden chain flower on the military flag to symbolize victory. Thai people also liked to plant the golden chain flower around their houses. In Thai culture, the golden chain flower was a symbol of good luck. As the highest temple in Thailand, the Jade Buddha temple naturally had to enjoy the highest treatment. That was why when the Jade Buddha temple was first built, the king had given the pedestal of the golden lotus to the first abbot of the temple and asked him to inherit his legacy. In other temples in Thailand, monks weren't allowed to enjoy the pedestal of the golden lotus. Moreover, they had to follow the lead of the Jade Buddha temple. That was why the pedestal of the golden lotus in the Jade Buddha temple wasn't only a symbol of status, but also a symbol of power. After listening to this, I understood that Thai Buddhism was different from Chinese Buddhism. From a certain point of view, Thai Buddhism was mixed with the secular world. It wasn't just about faith but also politics. It was understandable. However, with my current cultivation base, I was no longer in the secular world, so I didn't really care about this kind of thing. In fact, my only purpose for coming here was the Tai Sui, which was to increase my cultivation base and reach the Yang God realm as soon as possible. However, since this place was Lord Shiva's territory, I didn't know how to bring it up. After all, the power of the 9 spirits was the most precious treasure of the Jade Buddha temple. I had to think of a better way to get it. Lord Shiva saw that I didn't say anything, and he seemed to know what I was thinking. He smiled and asked, "Are you here to observe the power of the 9 spirits?" I was thrilled. "I came here because I've encountered a bottleneck in my cultivation. I want to see if I can comprehend something while observing the power of the 9 spirit." After listening to me, Lord Shiva didn't answer me immediately. He gazed at me as if he wanted to see my power. After a while, his face became indifferent. He asked, "Your Excellency, I can't see through your power. I guess you're going to advance to the dragon rank soon." Before I could answer, Alati spoke first. He looked at Lord Shiva and said, "Master, you asked me to go to Wulong Baiman Palace to investigate the situation." It was the Holy Sun who was fighting with the people of Jinshan Temple. The Holy Sun almost killed Dragon Matron Kuei. Wet Dragon Granny didn't feel surprised when he heard this. Perhaps he also knew how powerful Dragon Granny Kuei was. Since he couldn't see through my cultivation base, it wasn't strange that Dragon Matron Kuei was defeated by me. After a moment of silence, he suddenly said that he had asked Alati to investigate the situation because he had sensed the aura of the Tao Qi. However, he didn't expect that I would be the one who emitted the aura of the Tao Qi. Since I had been recognized by the power of the 9 spirits, why would I still use the Tao Qi? Since Lord Shiva had stayed in China for 10 years, he must have known that the cultivators of China all practiced the Tao Qi. He knew that I could use the power of the 9 spirits because Alati had seen it in the exchange competition in Shenzhen. However, at that time, I had only used the black bead that Goldie had given me and hadn't really practiced the sorcery energy. Therefore, he didn't know that I could practice 2 kinds of energy at the same time. This matter had already spread in the country, so there was no need to hide it. Since he was so curious, I told him the reason. I didn't expect that after Lord Shiva heard that I had 2 kinds of spiritual energy in my body and that I could practice at the same time, he looked very surprised. Not only that, but his whole body was trembling. I didn't know whether it was because of excitement or fear. Chapter 809. I didn't know what was going on. His sudden action caught me off guard. At this moment, many questions popped up in my head. I was dumbstruck. Alati, who was sitting next to me, wore a startled face. He didn't know why his master would do that. However, he seemed to recognize that he couldn't sit still anymore. He kneeled in front of me and followed his master's lead. Looking at the master and disciple's behavior, I gradually understood that this matter might be related to my identity. I hurried to ask them to stand up. "Shiva, what's going on?" Shiva didn't answer me immediately. He asked Alati to leave first. It seemed I couldn't let him know about this. Alati didn't hesitate. He left the room and closed the door. After he left, Chidragupta told him the reason for the incident. This is a secret that the previous abbot of the Jade Buddha temple has always kept. Before his master passed away, he told him that this secret can only be revealed when the emissary appears. After listening to him, I became more curious. How was this secret related to me? More precisely, how was it related to my identity? From him, I learned that the power of the 9 spirits worshipped in the Jade Buddha temple had descended from the sky when the first abbot was still in office. At first, people didn't know his origin. They only knew that he had a special power that had never appeared in Thailand before. That power was really strong. At that time, the power of the 9 spirits was seriously injured. Under such circumstances, even Zhao Kuan wasn't his match. At that time, the situation in Thailand was complicated. Since the Jade Buddha temple was connected to the government, many forces wanted to uproot it. The Jade Buddha temple was already in a difficult situation. Now that they had lost Zhao Kuan, they couldn't resist the outside forces. Almost everyone thought that the Jade Buddha temple had run out of luck. However, the abbot didn't think so. He thought that it was a heaven-sent opportunity. If he could keep this power in the temple, he could use his power to protect the Jade Buddha temple. With this thought in mind, he went to talk to the abbot and asked him to stay in the Jade Buddha temple. At that time, the power of 9 spirits was seriously injured. Perhaps knowing that she could not continue to flee and had to find a place to take refuge to recover from her injuries, she agreed to the abbot's request. The abbot was also quite scheming. He was afraid that the power of the 9 spirits was just perfunctory, so he proposed a condition, wanting the power of the 9 spirits to give him some of its power. The power of the 9 spirits seemed to know what he was planning. Without any hesitation, he gave the abbot a dark green bead, saying that it contained a portion of his power. When needed, it could be mobilized at will. After the 2 sides completed the transaction, the power of the 9 spirits was brought to a secret location to recuperate. Before he left, he told the abbot that he might stay in Jade Buddha temple for a long time. He would only leave when someone with 2 types of energy appeared. That person is the messenger sent by heaven to save the Jade Buddha temple. He must not be neglected. After the abbot heard this, he repeatedly expressed his gratitude. He knew the current situation of Jade Buddha temple. If no external forces intervened, Jade Buddha temple would soon perish. After saying that, Shiragamus stopped talking. I finally understood the reason for his previous behavior. Perhaps part of it was to comply with Master's order, and the other part was to ask me to save Jade Buddha temple. At present, Jade Buddha temple's situation was not optimistic. It seemed that the crisis of hundreds of years had not been resolved. I was very clear about this, but I did not care too much about it. Previously, he mentioned that the power of the 9 spirits came from heaven. I knew very well about the birth of Tai Sui, so it was understandable that it came from heaven. However, I did not know why he was seriously injured. As far as I knew, Tai Sui was very powerful. Even Yen Nantian, the Yang God's celestial master, could not withstand a blow from him. Since he could seriously injure Tai Sui, his cultivation was indeed terrifying. At present, I knew that only President Li, the Lord of Fairyland, and the man in Wanwu Grotto Heaven, who had ascended to heaven, Wang Can's father, could do it. But Wang Can's family was from the Wu tribe, and his father would not do such a thing. Moreover, according to the time, it happened hundreds of years ago. Even if these people lived for a long time, their cultivation at that time should not be too high. In other words, it was someone else who had injured Tai Sui. However, it had been a long time, and I had no way to know the whole story. I could only wait until I met Tai Sui and asked him. With that thought, I couldn't wait to see Tai Sui. I immediately asked Lord Shiva, "Can you take me to see Tai Sui?" Lord Shiva didn't hesitate and answered, "Anytime." I didn't linger and followed him out of the room. We walked for more than 10 minutes, bypassing all the buildings in Jade Buddha temple. Eventually, we arrived at a deserted place. I was surprised to see this desolate place. Except for weeds, there was no building, not even a cave. It was hard to imagine where they had hidden Tai Sui. Lord Shiva seemed to see the doubt in my eyes. He explained, "My lord, you don't know this. The power of the 9 spirits is too big, and we couldn't hide it in any building. So, we had to let it hide underground." After listening to him, I didn't answer him. I took a step forward and scanned the ground. I found that there was a restriction formation here. It seemed Lord Shiva didn't lie to me. I retracted my eyes and asked Lord Shiva to open the restriction formation. He nodded and sat cross-legged on the ground. Then, he took off the string of prayer beads from his chest. Then, he closed his eyes and chanted a spell. As the incantation sounded, the string of Buddhist beads gradually left his hand and flew a few meters in front of him before stopping. At the same time, the prayer beads spun in the air and radiated Buddha light. This scene was familiar. It was almost the same as when Miao Ju opened the Spirit Lock Tower. A moment later, Lord Shalongpa shouted. Then, a golden door appeared under the string of prayer beads. I was happy. It seemed this was the entrance. I hurried to open the door. However, I was alarmed. I turned around and looked at Lord Shiva. Lord Shiva seemed to know what I was thinking. He shook his head and said, "I haven't reached Long Pu yet. I can't go in and serve the power of the 9 spirit. My lord, please go in alone. I'll wait here." I had heard about this from Ality before. Wet Dragon Mother's words made sense. However, I was still doubtful. I didn't know if he was trying to trick me or not. Anyway, I had come here to swallow the Tai Sui and become a Yang God Celestial Master. I was going to see the Tai Sui soon. Even if there was a mountain of daggers and a sea of fire in front of me, I had to go. With this thought in mind, I didn't hesitate to open the door and walk in. As soon as I stood still, the door closed. I didn't care about it and looked ahead. This place was a cave, and I was standing at the highest point of the cave. Rows of winding stone stairs were chiseled on the surrounding rock walls. The stone stairs seemed to extend to the bottom of the cave. I didn't hurry to go down. I stood on the stone stairs and looked down. However, it was very dim down there. Even with my Heavenly Master Seal cultivation base, I could only see 5 or 6 meters ahead. It felt like I was in the Spirit Lock Tower. The atmosphere here was a little strange. I hadn't sensed any fluctuation of witchcraft energy since I had entered this place. His heart was filled with suspicions. Could it be that Shiva had played some tricks on him? However, since I was already here, I had to find out the truth. For the time being, I put my suspicion aside and walked down the stone stairs. After walking for several minutes, I saw several marks on the stone stairs in front of me. Along the way, I carefully observed the surroundings. I hadn't found anything strange before, so it was a little strange to see a mark here. I carefully examined it and found that there was a faint aura of witchcraft energy on the mark. Previously, Ality had told me that all the monks in the Jade Buddha Temple who had been recognized by the power of the 9 spirits and had become dragon primes had to go there to serve the power of the 9 spirits. Combined with what Lord Shiva had said, the marks here should have been left by the monks who had become dragon primes. In other words, this place was the resting place of the Tai Sui. After understanding this, I didn't delay any longer and quickly walked down the stone stairs. After walking for about 1 hour, a building appeared below me. From its appearance, it seemed to be in the shape of a tower. Previously, I felt that the way Lord Shiva opened the restriction was similar to the way Miaojue opened the Spirit Lock Tower. After I entered the cave, I felt that the aura of the primal chaos in this cave was almost the same as the aura in the Spirit Lock Tower. Could it be that this pagoda was also a Spirit Lock pagoda? I was curious and quickened my pace. When I could see the whole tower, I found that it wasn't the Spirit Lock Tower. This tower only had 4 wheels. According to the records in the Buddhist scriptures, it wasn't comparable to the Spirit Lock Tower. However, the strange thing was that this tower didn't have any floors. From a distance, it didn't look like a tower at all. It looked more like a beacon tower with edges and corners. This tower was not made of stone, but metal. There were strange patterns engraved all over it. At first glance, it looked a little messy, but after careful observation, it was very orderly. What was even more strange was that this tower didn't have any doors or windows. Moreover, it was surrounded by hard stone walls. It seemed the Tai Sui was hiding in this strange tower. With that thought in mind, I took a step forward and used my heavenly insight to check the situation inside the tower. Unexpectedly, I was blown away by a force. I tasted something sweet in my throat, and I vomited a mouthful of blood. I was bewildered. I didn't expect that this strange tower didn't only have a strange shape, but it also contained a tremendous power. I had just wanted to take a look at it, but I was wounded badly. If I took out the Xianyuan sword to break through, the backlash would be even worse. Chapter 8:10. Whether it was its structure or its power, it was enough to prove that this item was extraordinary. After I got the Xianyuan sword, I studied the appearance, usage, and power of the 10 great ancient divine weapons. Previously, I thought that this pagoda was somehow related to the spirit sealing pagoda in the Crouching Buddha Temple. I didn't think of anything else and neglected the most important point. Now that my mind was clear, I suddenly remembered that this pagoda had an ancient aura, and its shape was exactly the same as one of the ancient divine weapons, the Haotian pagoda. It was said that the Haotian pagoda could absorb the stars and change the moon. It was an important treasure in the heavenly realm and had immense power. It was said that it could subdue all demons and evil spirits. When necessary, it could even subdue immortals and gods. However, no one knew where he went after that. No one knew where he was. As for its origin, I've read about it in some ancient books. The two words Haotian in the Haotian pagoda referred to Hao Tian Emperor, who was also known as Taihao Fushi. Taihao Fushi used to be the heavenly emperor, and this Haotian pagoda was forged by him. At that time, some people thought that the Haotian pagoda had gone to the human world, but a great war broke out in the human world, and the later generations didn't have time to look for it. After thousands of years, the matter of the ancient divine artifact could no longer be investigated and was gradually forgotten by people. I could confirm that the pagoda in front of me wasn't the spirit-sealing pagoda, but the Haotian pagoda. I was overjoyed by this discovery. However, after the ecstasy, I quickly realized that it wasn't useful to know that this was the Haotian pagoda. On the one hand, I couldn't go in, and on the other hand, I couldn't get in touch with the Tai Sui inside. I didn't expect this situation. I sat down cross-legged and leaned against the stone wall to heal my wounds while thinking. After I entered, I didn't see anyone else. According to Arati and Shalongpo's description, all the Longpu in the Jade Buddha Temple had to come and serve the Tai Sui. They couldn't possibly deceive me, and I didn't see any Longpu. The biggest possibility was that the Longpu were in the pagoda. If the Longpu entered by themselves, it meant that the monks of the Jade Buddha Temple knew how to enter. Shalongpo, as the host, didn't tell me, so it was impossible. From this, I deduced that the Longpu in the Jade Buddha Temple had been summoned by the Tai Sui. In order to enter the pagoda, one needed the Tai Sui's permission. As I pondered, my body returned to normal. I stood up and mobilized the shaman energy in my body, spreading it out. I tried to attract Tai Sui's attention in the Haotian pagoda. Sure enough, a few seconds later, there was some movement in the tower. I heard a light cough from within the tower. Immediately after, I felt a strong suction force engulfing me. I knew that this was Tai Sui's method, so I didn't resist and let it sweep me into the clear heaven pagoda. After I stood still, only then did I discover that the inside of this vast heaven pagoda was completely red, but there were no lamps in the surroundings, which was rather strange. I didn't dwell too much on this matter. I looked in front of me and saw an enormous figure standing not far from me. Dozens of pieces of red cloth were scattered around his feet. I took a closer look and saw that the cloth was covering white bones. At this point, I suddenly understood. The red cloth was a monk's robe, and the white bones should be the previous long poo of Jade Buddha Temple. It seemed like what Alati had said earlier was not true. Those monks weren't here to serve the power of the 9 spirits. They were here to offer sacrifices to him. However, after thinking about it, Alati was just a small monk. Perhaps he didn't know about this, so I couldn't blame him. With that thought in mind, I didn't pay much attention to it and looked up. The Tai Sui's body was fiery red. This scene reminded me of the time I saw Xiao Jin. Xiao Jin was a golden Tai Sui, while the Tai Sui in front of me was red. When I was in the Een Corpse sect, the Heavenly Law's corpse was black. The Tai Sui was born from the Sui star. Could it be that they were also divided into 5 elements? Red and purple represented fire, brown represented earth, white and gold represented metal, black and gray represented water, and green represented wood. Thinking about it, it seemed to make sense. I didn't pay much attention to it before, but since the Tai Sui was divided into 5 elements, I couldn't figure out its function at the moment. At this time, a vague voice came from above. The strength of your Jade Buddha Temple is getting worse. It's been dozens of years, and you've only sent 1 person here. From his tone, it seemed he regarded me as a sacrifice sent by the Jade Buddha Temple. This wasn't surprising to me. I remembered that when I was in the Een Corpse sect, the Water Tai Sui wanted to attack me. At that time, the sacrificial evil spirit stopped it with 1 sentence. Not only that, but the Tai Sui also gave me its shaman energy origin. Moreover, when I saw Xiao Jin for the first time, he acted so intimately with me. It seemed that the Tai Sui all knew my identity. From the conversation between the sacrificial evil spirit and the water Tai Sui, the reason why the Tai Sui were still alive was to complete something. And in this matter, I was the most important link. However, I still couldn't figure out what they were planning. This time, I finally met a living Tai Sui. Perhaps I could get some information from it. With that in mind, I didn't want to talk nonsense with the Tai Sui. I directly said, "Look at me. Who am I?" After hearing my words, the Tai Sui didn't get angry. He lowered his head and looked at me. His eyes were bright. After looking for a long time, his face finally revealed a happy expression. He said, "You're finally here." I wasn't surprised by his words. Earlier, Shidragarva had also mentioned that before Tai Sui left, he told the first abbot of Jade Buddha Temple that there would be a person with 2 types of energy in his body who would come after many years. It was obvious that the Tai Sui knew that I would come here after a few hundred years. That was why he was waiting for me while healing his wounds. I clasped my hands behind my back and looked at him. Then, I said with my own accent, "Yes, I'm here." Unexpectedly, the Tai Sui asked with a puzzled face, "Why is your cultivation level so low?" His words made me frown. When I was in the Een Corpse sect, when the Tai Sui talked to the sacrificial evil spirit, he was also puzzled. At that time, they said a lot of things that I didn't understand. When I asked the sacrificial evil spirit, he didn't want to tell me. After listening to him, I couldn't help but recall what happened in the past. After pondering for a while, I asked the Tai Sui, "Why are you so puzzled?" The Tai Sui was silent for a moment and didn't answer. It seemed that he was also thinking about it. After a few minutes, he sighed and said, "I don't know if I should tell you about this. However, since you found me, you must know some inside information." Hearing him say that, I was overjoyed. However, I didn't know what he meant by this. Although I had doubts in my heart, I didn't ask any more. I just quietly waited for him to tell me. Seeing that I didn't respond, the Tai Sui continued, "You've seen the metal element Tai Sui, right? I don't understand why you haven't advanced to the Yang God Celestial Master yet. Did something happen?" The Tai Sui of the metal attribute that he mentioned should be referring to Little Gold. It seemed that my previous guess was right. The Tai Sui also had 5 elements. However, according to his logic, it seemed that I had to be a young god celestial master after seeing Xiao Jin. Moreover, from his tone, I knew that he also knew Xiao Jin. I even had a feeling that they had discussed something. The development of the matter was beyond my expectations. However, my mind was blank and I couldn't find any clues. After saying that, the Tai Sui didn't speak for a long time. It seemed that he was waiting for my response. Looking at his face, if I didn't tell him the details, I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to get any useful information from him. Thinking of this, I had to tell him the whole story. When he heard that Xiao Jin had gone missing, a look of sudden realization appeared on his face, and he muttered something in a low voice. However, I kept an eye on him and listened to everything he said. He said, "Does he really want to do that?" His words confirmed my previous guess. The Tai Sui and Xiao Jin had discussed something before. However, from his expression, it seemed that Xiao Jin had left to do something. And this matter seemed to have exceeded his expectations, so much so that it disrupted their plans. As for this plan, it must be related to my cultivation base. At this time, my cultivation base was at the Seal Celestial Master realm. If Xiao Jin hadn't left, according to their plan, I would have become a young god celestial master. However, if I had become a young god celestial master, I wouldn't have come to Thailand. However, the Tai Sui seemed to know that I would come here to look for him. From this, it seemed that they had already planned this matter. Presumably, even if I had become a young god celestial master, I would still need to use the Tai Sui in the future. The Tai Sui suddenly broke the quiet atmosphere. He heaved a long sigh and seemed to have made a compromise. Before I could ask, he spoke first. "I know why you're here. I don't know if what he did was right or wrong. All right. This matter has to be settled." After saying that, he closed his eyes and didn't speak again. Although I was quite eager to advance, I still had a lot of questions to ask him, so I didn't rush to do anything. Seeing that I didn't move, he couldn't help but feel suspicious and asked me why. From his previous behavior, I knew that he wouldn't mention the matter between him and Xiao Jin. That was why I didn't ask about it. I just asked him who had hurt him and why he was in the Haotian pagoda. After listening to me, he didn't feel surprised. He nodded and told me everything. According to him, he and Xiao Jin were together. However, later on, someone knew what they had discussed. That person then attacked and injured them. At that time, he and Xiao Jin were separated. Hearing that, I was frightened. The person who could injure two Tai Sui at the same time couldn't be an ordinary person. I was afraid that only an immortal who had ascended could do that. Thinking about that, I couldn't help but ask him who that person was. Chapter 8:11. Tai Sui's action confused me. I followed his line of sight, but there was only darkness. I couldn't see anything. I asked again, but Tai Sui shook his head as if he didn't want to talk about it. He shook his head and told me that he didn't know where he was going. He ran out of the city and ended up in Thailand. That was how he managed to avoid that man's pursuit. At that time, he was severely wounded. He found a place to recuperate and stayed in the Jade Buddha Temple. As for his conversation with the Jade Buddha Temple's abbot, I've heard it from Shiva. This time, when I listened to his story, it wasn't too different. However, I was interested in what he mentioned later. He said that the Haotian pagoda had existed before he came here. The abbot didn't know its origin. He just told him that the pagoda could isolate all auras. As long as he hid in the pagoda, no one could find him. At that time, Tai Sui was afraid and worried. When he heard that, he was overjoyed and stayed in the Clear Heaven Pagoda. However, the Jade Buddha Temple's abbot was greedy for his power. He asked Tai Sui to teach the monks of the Jade Buddha Temple their technique. Under such circumstances, Tai Sui agreed without thinking. In the beginning, when the monks of the Jade Buddha Temple entered the Haotian Pagoda, Tai Sui would spare no effort to teach them. However, as time went by, the origin of the witch energy disappeared, and Tai Sui's power weakened. Usually, he didn't have any witch energy to supply. Only when the 4 stars appeared could he get some replenishment. The Jade Buddha temple became bigger and bigger with more monks. As time went by, Tai Sui's witch energy was drained. Later on, he didn't want to give his power to the monks of the Jade Buddha temple anymore. At that time, the Jade Buddha temple had a lot of Long Pu and Zhao Kuan cultivators. After the high-level monks had a secret plan, they decided to enter the Haotian pagoda to kill Tai Sui and take his witch energy. The crisis ended because those monks underestimated Tai Sui's power. After that, Tai Sui sent out an order. He wanted the Jade Buddha temple's warriors, who had reached the Dragon Universal Realm, to enter the pagoda to cultivate with him. At the same time, Tai Sui guaranteed the safety of the Jade Buddha temple. At that time, the low-level monks of the Jade Buddha temple didn't know what had happened. They just saw their grandmasters staying in the pagoda and didn't come out, so they agreed to it. This rule was passed down from generation to generation. As for Tai Sui, it devoured the Jade Buddha temple monks that entered the vast heaven pagoda and gradually recovered from its injuries, all the way until today. When I saw those skeletons just now, I just speculated that those Long Pu had become Tai Sui's food, but I didn't expect that there were so many secrets. After listening to the Tai Sui's detailed explanation, he finally understood. I didn't doubt Tai Sui's method, but I felt that the monks of the Jade Buddha temple were a little strange. After so many years, the Long Pu who had come here hadn't shown up again. Didn't they suspect something? Of course, what they think has nothing to do with me. The most important thing right now is to borrow the power of Tai Sui to advance to the Yang God Celestial Master. As for how to advance, I already know in my heart. It's to devour this Tai Sui. After the devouring, the Tai Sui disappeared. I had an indescribable feeling in my heart, but the Tai Sui didn't care. Instead, he took the initiative to ask me if I had a devouring technique. If I did, I could use a spell to help him. The art of devouring. I immediately thought of the sky-devouring art. According to the records in the Death Scripture, if this art was cultivated to completion, one could devour the heavens. This meant that it was completely possible to devour the Tai Sui with this art. However, the problem was that I hadn't obtained the 2nd volume of the Death Scripture for a long time. During this time, I had only cultivated the sky-devouring art to the initial stage. I was still far from the realm where I could devour the Tai Sui. After I explained the situation, the Tai Sui shook his head. He said that if I didn't have a devouring technique, he could only forcefully transfer his power into my body. However, this was dangerous and time-consuming. It would take at least a few years for me to completely absorb it. I naturally didn't want to stay here for a few years. Moreover, there were many things to do in the country. Not to mention anything else, I wouldn't be allowed to disappear for a few years on the other side. With this thought in mind, I couldn't help but feel anxious. I couldn't help but take out the 2nd volume of the Death Scripture. I found the place where the sky-devouring art was recorded and read it several times. I really wanted to see some shortcut in it, but it was obvious that shortcuts were just wishful thinking, especially on the path of cultivation. However, I definitely wouldn't be willing to give up just like that. After thinking about it, it was better to stay here for the time being and continue cultivating the sky-devouring art. The witchcraft aura here was abundant, which was greatly beneficial to cultivation. Although the sky-devouring art didn't have a shortcut, it wouldn't take a few years. Having made up my mind, I didn't hesitate anymore. After informing the Tai Sui, I immediately put away the Death Scripture and closed my eyes to cultivate the sky-devouring art. The first layer of the sky-devouring art was to absorb the energy of the opponent's attacks through the skin. The second layer was similar to the sword-devouring art that Little Ah Mo's master, the old Taoist Huang Zhu, had imparted to me. This layer seemed to be in preparation for devouring. When I first saw this technique, I felt that it was somewhat evil. However, after putting it into practice, especially after the battle with Old Man Yuan, I changed my previous thoughts. In reality, with my current cultivation, everything is a great Tao. In terms of techniques, there was no longer any distinction between good and evil. It was impossible to cultivate the second layer on my own. Since there was no one else in the clear sky pagoda, I could only ask for Tai Sui's help. Of course, he wouldn't refuse my request. After listening to my detailed explanation, he spat out a mass of air that was wrapped in shamanic aura towards me. I didn't dare to be negligent and hastily operated the sky-devouring art. I suddenly opened my mouth and swallowed the mass of air. That was far from enough. As I circulated the sky-devouring art, I also used the devouring technique that Zhang Kanwen had imparted to me to digest the witchcraft aura. In less than a few seconds, the witchcraft aura fused into the veins of the sky and became energy that I could use. At that moment I was elated. It seemed that the second layer was beginning to bear fruit. I had to be more familiar with it to cultivate to the third layer. Time passed in the pagoda. I didn't know how much time had passed, but I finally cultivated the second layer to the extreme. However, I wasn't in a hurry to look at the third layer. Haste makes waste. If I were to rush to the next step, it would be very difficult to comprehend it. As such, I calmed myself down and stabilized the previous two layers. If I could comprehend something from them, the next layer would naturally come naturally. Thus, I calmed myself down and leaned against the wall of the clear sky pagoda to meditate. In the blink of an eye, I didn't know how much time had passed. When I opened my eyes, I already had a vague understanding of the third layer of the sky-devouring art. Only then did I take out the second volume of the Death Scripture. After flipping through the third layer of the cultivation method, I verified it with what I had obtained in my heart. I finally understood and everything became clear. After completely comprehending the sky-devouring art, there was no need for me to delay any longer. After circulating the cultivation method once, I stood up and asked Tai Sui, "Are you ready?" He had been waiting for this moment for thousands of years. He appeared to be even more impatient than I was. After hearing my question, he nodded abruptly. He didn't have the slightest bit of sorrow for having to sacrifice himself. To be honest, I only roughly knew the story behind this. However, looking at Tai Sui at that moment, I couldn't help but feel an indescribable heaviness in my heart. I opened my mouth but couldn't say anything. After a while, I could only cup my hands at him and close my eyes to circulate the sky-devouring art. As I circulated the cultivation method, I felt my body become light after a few seconds, and I slowly floated into the air. Then, under my control, the aura in my body flowed backward, as if it wanted to burst every pore in my body. This tearing feeling wasn't any less painful than when my cultivation had been destroyed. Fortunately, the pain came suddenly and left quickly. After a while, the feeling disappeared, and I returned to my previous state. This comfortable feeling didn't last long. Soon, the aura flowing backward from my body turned into several ropes that flew toward Tai Sui, entangling its neck and limbs. After a while, Tai Sui's face contorted as if it was suffering from indescribable torture. The ropes became tighter and tighter, as if they were about to split Tai Sui into several pieces. During this process, the ropes constantly emitted witchcraft aura that enveloped Tai Sui. The witchcraft aura became denser and denser. In the end, Tai Sui was completely wrapped up like a cocoon. I could sense that Tai Sui's aura had completely disappeared at this moment. With my cultivation alone, I couldn't summon so much witchcraft aura. It was obvious that most of the witchcraft aura was forced out of Tai Sui's body. Then, the witchcraft aura kept spinning, and the witchcraft aura in it became denser and denser. When the spinning speed was so fast that I couldn't see it clearly, it suddenly flew up and hit my body. I couldn't bear the violent impact. My eyes rolled up and I passed out. Before I passed out, I vaguely saw Tai Sui's shadow in my life palace. He suddenly appeared there and swallowed my 3 souls. Then, he sat down cross-legged and closed his eyes. Above his head, the black and white celestial master seal was floating there, spinning constantly. When I woke up again, I didn't know how much time had passed. I felt as if I was soaking in a hot spring, which was indescribably comfortable and warm. Recalling what had happened before, I immediately sat up and looked inside my life palace. Just as I had seen before, Tai Sui's figure was still in his life palace. The 3 souls were nowhere to be seen, and the seal above his head had also disappeared. However, I could clearly feel the aura of the 3 souls in Tai Sui's body. Previously, I had heard Nangong say that the Yang God celestial master of the Wu tribe used Tai Sui as his Yang God. It should be like this. I had also heard Yen Nantian mention the matter of the 3 souls fusing with the seal. He said that the Yang God was formed by the gathering of the 3 souls in the seal. Judging from my current state, I had obviously advanced to the Yang God celestial master level. However, it was different from the Yang God of the Wu tribe and the Dao Qi Yang God. My Yang God was formed by Tai Sui devouring the 3 souls. The Dao Qi and witchcraft aura had merged into one. Compared to others, it was naturally far better. Not to mention the joy in my heart, I spent a few minutes calming down and tried to summon the Yang God. However, since I had just advanced, my realm was far from stable. After the Yang God that looked like Tai Sui appeared above my head, it only lasted for a few seconds. Then, I felt that my cultivation was instantly sucked out, and I couldn't hold on any longer. Even so, in just a few seconds I felt a godlike power. Although I was sitting cross-legged on the ground, in my consciousness, I felt as if I was standing on the dome, overlooking all living beings under my feet. This should be the power of the Yang God. Of course, there were still many mysteries of the Yang God, but I couldn't hold on for too long. I could only slowly explore it later. Now that the matter was over, I planned to leave immediately. However, after I got up, I recalled the conflict between me and the monks of Jinshan Temple and thought for a while. Jinshan Temple's Long Pu had been injured by me, so I didn't think he would let it go. My realm was not stable at the moment. If I went out now and met Jinshan Temple's Long Pu or even Zhao Kuan, I was afraid that it would be difficult for me to deal with them. Thinking of this, I gave up the idea of leaving the tower and sat down again. After devouring Tai Sui, my cultivation was raised to the Yang God level. A part of Tai Sui's majestic witchcraft aura was also left in my heaven veins. At this time, I could take advantage of the opportunity to consolidate my cultivation and refine it. In this way, I could also raise my cultivation to the early stage of the Yang God level. In this way, I could completely stabilize my cultivation. Soon, the witchcraft aura had circulated dozens of times in my body, and my cultivation had finally stabilized at the early stage of the Yang God Celestial Master level. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.